Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. She was used to being in the spotlight. Millions knew her name. Her image was instantly recognizable, and her life played out for the world to see. To some, she was an inspiration. To others, an object of admiration or envy. But no one truly knew her. No one saw what was hidden behind the perfect picture. Mercedes Moore lived in a world where fame brought opportunities, but also risks. Among her followers were not just fans, but those who believed they had a right to her attention. One of them was convinced he knew her better than anyone. One of them decided their meeting was inevitable. Now her phone was silent. Messages remained unread. From the outside, everything looked the same, but inside, a nightmare was unfolding. Janae Gagné was born in 1987 in Los Angeles to Mark and Janetta Gagné. Her parents were known for their discipline and structure, traits shaped by their military background. They met while serving in the armed forces, but after getting married, they decided to leave that life behind and focus on building a business. Their ultimate goal was to open a restaurant, which later became their life's work. Janae was the eldest child, and in time, she became the older sister to two younger girls. She maintained a warm and trusting relationship with them. Her parents raised their daughters in an environment of discipline, but without excessive strictness. They instilled a sense of responsibility, while also encouraging independence and initiative. This approach shaped Janae's entrepreneurial mindset from a young age. From early childhood, she was energetic, curious, and had an easy way with people. Her outgoing nature kept her in the center of attention, and her natural charm and confidence made her popular among her peers. She was persistent. Once she set her mind on something, she wouldn't stop until she achieved it. At 12, Janae found a way to earn her own money. She set up a small makeshift studio for braiding hair in the garage of her family's home. At first, her clients were just friends and classmates, but soon word spread through the neighborhood. Before long, women lined up in the evenings, eager to get her signature braids. This small business gave Janae her first taste of financial independence, but her carefree childhood came to an abrupt end when she turned 14. Her parents decided to separate, and the divorce was anything but smooth. Conflicts and arguments followed, leaving a lasting impact on Janae. In the end, her father moved to Texas, a decision that shook her to her core. She remained in Los Angeles with her mother and sisters, but now her life was split between two worlds. Part of her time was spent with her mother, the other with her father, regularly traveling back and forth between states. This period had a profound impact on her personality. She became more short-tempered, withdrawn, and sharp in her responses. Her school performance declined, and tensions with her mother escalated. To her parents, it seemed like typical teenage rebellion, but in reality, Janae was struggling to cope with the breakdown of her family. Over time, the strain in her relationship with her parents began to ease. As she grew older, Janae was able to accept the situation and establish a new dynamic with both her mother and father. Gradually, she regained her balance, rekindled her energetic spirit, and once again earned the respect and admiration of those around her. By the time she graduated high school, Janae was determined to be successful in life, though she hadn't yet figured out exactly how. She completed her education with solid grades and enrolled in college, planning to pursue a career in dentistry. But fate had something else in store for her. After high school, Janae entered college with the goal of becoming a dental assistant. At the time, she saw it as a stable and reliable career path that would allow her to support herself and build a secure future. However, just a few months into her studies, she realized it wasn't the right fit. The coursework felt dry and uninspiring, and the idea of working in the field long-term no longer seemed appealing. Ultimately, Janae made a difficult decision. She dropped out of college despite her parents' objections. Her choice came as a shock to them. They had hoped their eldest daughter would follow a traditional career path, securing stability and success in a conventional way. It was during this time that Janae met a young man, and their relationship progressed quickly. He suggested they move to Las Vegas, assuring her that the city offered more opportunities for them to build an independent life and achieve financial freedom. Excited by the prospect of a fresh start, she agreed. Relocating to a new city turned out to be a major challenge. Las Vegas, a place that never sleeps, was filled with possibilities, but also demanded financial security and a clear survival strategy. Without a degree or work experience, finding a reliable source of income was no easy task. Janae explored different options, but most offered low pay and grueling hours with little room for advancement. One day, through acquaintances, she learned about an opportunity to work at a nightclub. What caught her attention was the potential to earn significantly more than in traditional jobs that didn't require a college degree. Despite her initial doubts and hesitations, her difficult financial situation pushed Janae to give it a try. Her first few shifts weren't easy. She wasn't sure if this line of work suited her, and she felt uncomfortable and uncertain. However, she quickly realized that her earnings outweighed her concerns. On average, she was making around $5,000 a week, enough to cover rent, enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, and even start saving. Over time, her perspective on the industry shifted. What had initially seemed like a temporary solution gradually became an intentional career move. She started to see that working in the entertainment industry wasn't just about making money. It was also a way to build valuable connections. Many club patrons were wealthy individuals, celebrities from the music and sports industries, and successful entrepreneurs. Janae observed how other women in her field used their work as a stepping stone to bigger opportunities. However, her family reacted negatively to her decision. When her parents found out what she was doing, it caused tension and disappointment. They couldn't accept the fact that Janae had turned away from a traditional career path in favor of a profession they viewed as questionable. Disagreements on the topic led to frequent conflicts, straining their relationship. Her family tried to convince her to return to a more stable and socially accepted career. But Janae stood by her decision. She emphasized that she was making a conscious choice, was happy with her life, and was earning well. But that wasn't enough for her parents. In their eyes, their daughter had given up a promising future in favor of an easy but unrespected source of income. Over time, the pressure from her family lessened. They realized that Janae was firm in her choices and had no intention of changing her lifestyle. However, the gap in how they viewed her career remained unresolved. For Janae, this period was a turning point. She had gained financial independence and confidence in herself, allowing her to shape her future on her own terms. Now she had access to opportunities she never had before, marking the beginning of her rise to broader recognition. While working in the entertainment industry, Janae understood that in order to advance, she needed to create a striking and memorable image. It was during this time that she came up with the stage name, Mercedes Moore. The new name had to sound bold, command attention, and set her apart from others. The experience she gained in her early nightclub jobs helped her develop a strategy for building her personal brand. She focused on working in venues that attracted a wealthier clientele, where the pay was higher and the networking opportunities were greater. Gradually, she began receiving invitations to exclusive establishments in Las Vegas. These high-end clubs were known for their elite atmosphere, often frequented by well-known public figures. Working in these exclusive venues opened new doors for Janae. She started meeting wealthy and influential people, and soon received invitations to private events. Over time, her social circle expanded to include well-known public figures. These connections helped her realize that she could use her appearance, lifestyle, and network to attract a larger audience. She saw the potential of social media as a tool for self-promotion and personal branding. Janae began actively growing her online presence, focusing primarily on Instagram, while also utilizing Snapchat and Twitter. Instagram proved to be the ideal platform for showcasing her image and lifestyle. Her popularity skyrocketed. Followers were captivated by her looks, luxurious lifestyle, and connections to celebrities. As time went on, Janae started appearing in the stories and posts of well-known personalities, further boosting her audience. Before long, her Instagram account reached 3 million followers. She had now become a recognizable figure in the influencer world. This new status allowed her to generate income through brand collaborations, sponsorships, and promotions that aligned with her image. This phase of her life marked a major transition. Janae was no longer just a woman working in the entertainment industry. She had become a media personality, someone people followed, talked about, and watched closely. As her social media fame continued to grow, Mercedes Moore started thinking about how to turn her massive following into a stable source of income. Sponsored content brought in money, but relying on platform algorithms and advertiser demands came with limitations. She wanted a way to take full control of her earnings and build a more direct connection with her audience. During this time, she took notice of OnlyFans, a platform that allowed content creators to sell exclusive material to subscribers for a monthly fee. Mercedes saw how many models and influencers were achieving financial success on the site and decided to give it a try. After setting up her account, she immediately started promoting it to her followers. Those interested in exclusive content flocked to her page, and within a short period, her subscriber count skyrocketed. In just a few months, she had thousands of paying followers and her earnings exceeded all expectations. Unlike brand deals that depended on outside companies, OnlyFans provided Janae with a stable and predictable income. She was no longer tied to late-night shifts at clubs and could work on her own terms. Financial independence allowed her to make decisions that once seemed out of reach. As her earnings grew, Janae was able to completely step away from the entertainment industry. Her primary source of income was now online. She created content, managed her social media presence, and built her personal brand. Leaving the club scene was a conscious and significant decision for her. She no longer wanted to depend on clients, rigid schedules, or the demands of a nightlife-driven career. This newfound stability also had a positive impact on her personal life. Around this time, she began a relationship with a man who was not involved in show business or the entertainment world. He preferred to stay out of the public eye, and their relationship developed away from media attention and fan speculation. Those close to Mercedes noted that she seemed calmer and more self-assured. She could now afford to live in a private, upscale community, travel freely, and pursue projects that genuinely excited her. She had plans to launch her own clothing line and expand her personal brand. On the surface, this chapter of her life appeared to be her most successful. Financial independence, personal happiness, and a thriving social media career. However, as her popularity grew, so did unforeseen dangers that she had underestimated. Among her millions of followers were not just devoted fans, but also individuals whose unhealthy obsession could lead to serious consequences. The first warning signs came when personal details started appearing in the comments under her posts. Strangers mentioned neighborhoods where she lived and listed places she frequently visited. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, but soon, things spiraled out of control. One user went as far as publicly posting her home address. This quickly became a serious problem. Soon after, messages containing threats, inappropriate requests, and persistent demands for meetings began flooding her inbox. And then, strangers started showing up at her house. Some arrived with gifts, hoping to get her attention. Others simply stood outside her gates, waiting for a glimpse of her. In some instances, people even rang her doorbell, asking to be let in. Initially, she dismissed these incidents as isolated events, but the situation kept escalating. Unknown individuals began lurking near her residence, waiting by her parking area, and following her movements. She started noticing the same cars parked nearby at different times of the day. Her lifestyle changed. She started going out less and became more cautious with her social media posts. Janae no longer tagged her location, avoided showing details of her home's interior, and took extra steps to prevent anyone from figuring out where she lived. The sense of security she once had was gone. Now, every knock at the door made her anxious, and unexpected noises put her on edge. At some point, Janae realized she couldn't continue living this way. She made the decision to move to a gated community in Houston. It seemed like the safest option. Secured entry, surveillance cameras, and on-site security. Her new home was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where no one could reach her without permission. It felt like this step would finally put an end to the unwanted attention. But even the highest fences couldn't protect her from what was about to happen. While Mercedes Moore was enjoying her success, someone was watching her from a distance. Someone she had never met and didn't even know existed. His name was Kevin Accordo. He lived in Florida, led what seemed to be a normal life, had no criminal history, held a job, and appeared to be just like millions of other people. But at some point, something in his mind shifted. Kevin became obsessed with Mercedes. He followed her every move through social media. Each new photo, every post, only deepened his fixation. She had no idea who he was just another follower among millions. But to him, she was the center of his world. Over time, his obsession turned into an unhealthy fixation. Kevin convinced himself that there was a special connection between them, even though they had never interacted. He studied her updates, analyzed her lifestyle, took note of the places she visited, and paid close attention to the people in her circle. At some point, watching from a distance was no longer enough. He decided he had to meet her. Kevin started looking for ways to find out where Mercedes lived, even though she was careful not to share her exact location. Small details in her posts gave him clues. He examined the backgrounds of her photos, compared interior elements to real estate listings, and combed through comments from followers, all in an attempt to pinpoint her address. The turning point came with one of her final posts. In the picture, a small detail, her front door, was visible. That was all Kevin needed. From this image, he was able to pinpoint the neighborhood, and when a follower casually mentioned the name of the residential complex, he had his answer. Now he knew exactly where to find her. Without hesitation, he got into his car and began the long drive to Texas. It was a journey spanning thousands of miles. He crossed multiple states, spending days on the road, but none of that mattered to him. He was convinced that this meeting would change everything. When Kevin Accordo arrived in Houston, his main goal was to get inside the gated community where Mercedes Moore lived. The area was secured with controlled access and on-site security. However, he managed to bypass these protections. According to law enforcement, he may have slipped in behind a resident's vehicle as they entered the complex or posed as a delivery driver to avoid suspicion. Surveillance footage captured him several times walking near her home, suggesting he was surveying the area before making his move. There were no signs of forced entry. The windows remained intact, the door was undamaged, leading investigators to believe that he may have waited for Mercedes at the entrance and forced his way in as she opened the door. Another possibility was that he had learned of a scheduled package delivery and used it as an excuse to get her to open up. Once he was inside, the situation took a deadly turn. The attack was swift and violent. The evidence suggested that Mercedes fought back with everything she had. Bloodstains on the walls, floor, and furniture painted a picture of a desperate struggle. She resisted until the very end, but Kevin had the physical advantage. Her injuries told the story of a brutal assault. Bruises and deep marks covered her body, indicating a sustained and aggressive attack. The trauma suggested that she had suffered severe blows to the head. There was no firearm found at the scene, but authorities determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation. Kevin had likely grabbed her by the neck and refused to let go until she stopped moving. After committing the crime, he did not leave. He stayed inside the apartment for 3 days. For 72 hours, he lived in the home of the person he had taken from this world. He slept in Mercedes' bed, ate from her refrigerator, and used her personal belongings. His fingerprints were everywhere. His presence was imprinted in every room. During those 3 days, he also left writings on the walls, mirrors, and doors. They were scribbled in red lipstick, a collection of disjointed phrases. Some expressed regret, others hinted at betrayal, and there were cryptic messages about Mercedes allegedly wearing another man's ring. Investigators believed this either pointed to a severe mental breakdown or an overwhelming sense of injustice that he felt. No one raised the alarm at first because Mercedes' family was in another city. Concern only arose when she stopped responding to calls and messages. That was when her father, Mark Gagney, made the decision to check on her in person. Arriving at her home on the evening of August 29th, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Her car was still in the garage, meaning she hadn't left the complex. He walked up to the front door, rang the doorbell, and knocked. No answer. Peering through the windows, he saw that the curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of movement inside. Mark knocked again, this time louder, another ring of the doorbell. Silence. He tried the doorknob, but the door was locked. Stepping back, he braced himself and threw his weight against it. It didn't budge at first, but on the second attempt, the lock gave way, and the door swung open. A strong, suffocating odor hit him instantly. The air inside was thick with decay. His stomach turned, but he forced himself to step inside. That's when his eyes locked onto the staircase. At the bottom, sprawled on the floor, was his daughter. Mark froze. Mercedes was lying face down, her body positioned unnaturally. Her clothing was stained with dried blood, her skin pale, her lips tinted with a bluish hue. Mark couldn't move, couldn't look away. Time itself seemed to stop. Then, suddenly, a dull noise came from upstairs. He snapped his head up. In the dim light of the second floor, he saw a figure collapsed on the ground. The man's body trembled slightly, but within seconds, he went still. Without hesitation, Mark ran up the stairs. Inside one of the rooms, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay a man with a lodged in his chest. He was still alive, but his eyes were already losing focus. Mark didn't recognize him. He had never seen this person before. Looking around, he noticed the same red writings covering the walls, mirrors, and doors. Lipstick scrawls, uneven and smeared, with erratic lettering that seemed to come from a deeply disturbed mind. Among the messages, "I'm sorry. I was deceived. She wore another man's ring." As Mark tried to process what he was seeing, the man on the floor took one final breath, and then he was gone. Police arrived just minutes after receiving the call. As investigators surveyed the scene, they identified the deceased as Kevin Accordo, a Florida resident with no prior criminal record and no history of legal trouble. It was confirmed that he had spent 3 days in the house after committing the crime. His actions suggested a deep psychological disturbance. He made no attempt to clean up the crime scene. He didn't try to escape. He simply waited. When the door opened and Mercedes' father stepped inside, Accordo realized his time was up. Knowing there was no way out, he grabbed a knife and inflicted a fatal wound to his own chest. Paramedics attempted to save him, but he passed away on the spot. The investigation confirmed that Kevin had never met Mercedes. They weren't acquaintances, had never spoken, and had no personal connection. The only link between them existed entirely in his mind. Piece by piece, police reconstructed what had happened. A man had stalked her through social media, tracked down her location, traveled thousands of miles to find her, broken into her home, taken her life, and then lived in her space as if she were still there. The truth was finally uncovered, but it changed nothing. As news of Mercedes Moore's tragic death made headlines, the public reaction was immediate. The case sparked widespread discussion, quickly gaining traction in both mainstream media and social platforms. But almost as soon as the news broke, misinformation followed. False reports flooded the internet. Some sources claimed her passing was due to an overdose of prohibited substances, while others stated she had died from COVID-19. Speculative articles circulated rumors about her health, suggesting she had a serious illness, and that complications had led to her death. Then came an even more bizarre theory, one that alleged Mercedes had lost her life during an intimate encounter. This rumor gained traction after unverified claims surfaced about how her body had been found. None of these rumors were based on fact. Official sources quickly dismissed the false narratives, confirming that her death was a result of a premeditated crime linked to stalking. With the full picture now clear, law enforcement had no further doubts. The perpetrator was gone. There would be no trial, no legal proceedings, and no sentence. Kevin Accordo had evaded justice by taking his own life, leaving Mercedes' family with an overwhelming sense of unfairness. For her loved ones, it meant that no one would be held accountable. There would be no conviction, no punishment that could bring even a fraction of closure. All that remained were scattered pieces of evidence, signs of struggle, the cryptic writings on the walls, and questions that would never be answered. Her family was devastated. Mark Gagne, her father, was the first to see her lifeless body. The trauma of that moment never left him. He spoke openly about how his mind constantly replayed that night, walking into his daughter's home and finding her gone. Her younger sisters lost more than a sibling. They lost their guiding figure, the person they looked up to. Her mother struggled to cope, crushed by the weight of what had happened. Despite their grief, the family made a decision. They would do everything they could to keep Mercedes' memory alive. Her father took to the media, speaking out about the dangers of stalking and the need for influencers to take their safety seriously. He wanted his daughter's story to serve as a warning to others. Case 2. The way children react to witnessing a serious crime can vary greatly depending on their age. Such traumatic events often lead to a range of psychological consequences, including withdrawal, heightened anxiety, aggression, or complete emotional shutdown. In these moments, it is crucial for a son or daughter to hear from trusted adults and understand that the frightening incident is over and that they are now safe. But what happens when two young sisters witness an act of extreme cruelty against their own mother? The case of Tiffany James, a young mother raising several children, sounds like something out of a horror movie, except it happened in real life, shaking the quiet town of Brandon, Florida to its core. Tiffany Joanna James was born on August 18, 1980, in Tampa, Florida. She was the only child of Rosalind James and Turner Humphrey. Her parents were never officially married and separated shortly after her birth. Her father moved to another state, started a new family, and showed little interest in his firstborn daughter. Many years later, as an adult, Tiffany took the initiative to find him. They talked, and she reassured him that she held no resentment or hard feelings, expressing a desire to stay in touch. Through this reunion, Tiffany met her half-siblings and their families. They quickly bonded, forming warm and supportive relationships. As for Rosalind, she focused on her personal life and left Tiffany in the care of her own parents. Despite having both biological parents, Tiffany was effectively raised by her grandparents. Her mother visited occasionally, but did not take an active role in her upbringing. Instead, it was her aunts, Barbara and Vicky, and her grandmother, Bua, who took on the responsibility. They made sure Tiffany attended preschool and school, encouraged her achievements, and supported her in every way possible. Tiffany was a bright student with a passion for literature and a natural, creative flair. She dreamed of opening her own beauty salon one day, aiming to become the best in the industry in her city. She was social, well-liked, and effortlessly stylish. With her striking looks and confidence, she always drew attention, and young men found her irresistible. During high school, Tiffany began dating a boy named Derek Andrews. He was just a year older than her, but at the time, both believed their love would last forever. In her senior year, Tiffany became pregnant. On July 26, 1998, she gave birth to their first child, a baby boy they named Derek Jr. Her plans for college had to be put on hold as she devoted herself fully to motherhood. Derek Sr. worked odd jobs to support the family, while the James family stepped in to help the young parents as much as they could. In August 2002, 4-year-old Derek Jr. became a big brother. The couple welcomed another son, naming him Darren after his paternal grandfather. By this time, Tiffany and Derek Sr. were living together in a small rented apartment. Money was always tight, but they remained hopeful for the future and dreamed of building a stable life together. However, a couple of years later, their romantic feelings faded, and they decided to part ways amicably. The boys remained with Tiffany, while Derek Sr. provided support and made an effort to spend as much time with them as possible. He eventually started a new relationship, but remained actively involved in his sons' lives, determined to be the best father he could be for Derek Jr. and Darren. Now a single mother with 2 young sons, Tiffany started thinking seriously about her future. She wanted a career that would allow her to provide for her family independently. Having never pursued further education after high school, she was eager to change that. She enrolled in a medical college, hoping to become a cosmetic specialist. Her ultimate goal was to open her own practice, or even an entire clinic, where she could turn her passion into a successful business. While studying, Tiffany moved back into her grandparents' home, since managing both tuition and rent was too much of a financial burden. Her family also stepped in to help care for her sons whenever she was at work or in class. After completing her education, the young mother secured a job at a prestigious private clinic, working as an assistant to a well-known doctor. She was earning a steady income and steadily advancing in her career. For a while, it seemed like everything was finally falling into place. However, Tiffany deeply missed having a strong, supportive partner, someone she could rely on during tough times. In early 2007, Tiffany met a man named Daryl Williams by chance. He was 14 years older than her and already had 3 grown children from a previous relationship. Despite the significant age difference, it didn't stand in the way of their romance. If anything, Tiffany saw him as a mature and reliable man who was truly ready for a committed relationship. Their relationship progressed quickly, and before long, 27-year-old Tiffany found out she was pregnant again. The news came as a complete surprise to both of them. Nevertheless, they were happy, and Daryl immediately proposed. Tiffany gladly accepted, but there was another unexpected twist. During a routine checkup, she discovered she was expecting twins. In March 2008, Tiffany gave birth to twin girls, whom she named Diamond and Dania. This joyful milestone brought a new sense of excitement into her life. She devoted herself entirely to her family, spending every free moment with them. She loved taking her children to events, exploring new activities together, and creating special memories. Tiffany also had a passion for dressing up her daughters, often styling them in coordinating outfits that made them look like they had stepped straight out of a fashion magazine. Her older sons were active in sports, participating in baseball, track, and swimming, while the twins were enrolled in dance classes and rhythmic gymnastics from an early age. As the years passed, the children grew, but Tiffany and Daryl never officially married. Over time, their relationship began to unravel. They drifted apart and struggled to understand each other. Tiffany soon realized that Daryl was not the person she had once believed him to be. Their relationship finally came to an end when she discovered that he had been unfaithful. Without hesitation, she packed up, took her children, and left. After separating from Daryl, Tiffany moved with her family to the peaceful town of Brandon, Florida. The community was known for its excellent infrastructure, low crime rates, and affordable housing, seemingly the perfect place to raise a family and start anew. Determined to build a stable future, Tiffany completed a hairstyling program and secured a job at one of the best salons in town. She quickly gained a loyal clientele and became known for her talent and creativity. With big dreams of one day opening her own salon, she began scouting potential locations to rent. Her skill, ambition, and growing reputation made her one of the most sought-after stylists in the area, setting the stage for a promising career ahead. The single mother of four moved into a spacious rental apartment in a newly built residential complex, located in one of the best neighborhoods in town. Nearby were a school, a dance studio, and a large sports center, everything she needed to provide her family with a comfortable and fulfilling life. By 2012, her sons had grown more independent and often helped care for their younger sisters. Around this time, Tiffany decided to reconnect with her father and her half-siblings. She traveled to Alabama to find them, and from that moment on, their family bonds were restored. They kept in touch regularly, visited each other for holidays, and their children quickly became close. Life was coming together. Her finances had stabilized, she was surrounded by loved ones, and she felt secure in the future. Yet despite all of this, Tiffany, a young, ambitious, and attractive woman, longed for romance. She still believed in love and hoped to meet a man who would not only love her, but also embrace her family as his own. A man with whom she could build a strong, happy home. In 2014, Tiffany launched her own small business, which she was successfully growing. That same year, at 34 years old, she reconnected with a man named Ben, someone she had known in her youth but hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Their unexpected meeting at a shopping mall marked the beginning of something special, though at first they kept their relationship private. Ben was also a single parent, recently settled in Brandon with his 2 young children. At first, he and Tiffany met as friends, sharing coffee and deep conversations, but when he finally confessed his feelings for her, Tiffany felt like the happiest woman in the world and admitted she felt the same. Their relationship blossomed, and their families fully supported their union. Tiffany was on cloud 9, eager to cherish this new happiness without rushing things. She kept their romance low-key, sharing details only with her closest friends and family. She didn't post pictures of them together on social media, but she was gradually preparing for a big change. They had decided to move in together and create a home as one family. On October 1st, 2015, Tiffany shared a mysterious yet romantic post on her personal social media page. It was a photo of 2 intertwined hands, one male, one female, both wearing wedding bands, with a Bible in the background. The caption read simply, "Yes." With this post, she hinted at her engagement, but chose to keep her fiancé's identity a secret for now. Tiffany and her family always went all out for Halloween. She and the kids planned their costumes in advance, carved pumpkins into glowing lanterns, and then ventured out to collect treats from their neighbors. By this time, Derek and Darren were old enough to celebrate the holiday with their friends, while the younger twins, Diamond and Dania, still enjoyed trick-or-treating with their mom. Since they lived in a large apartment complex, walking door to door wasn't as exciting. Instead, they headed to a nearby neighborhood filled with single-family homes, where Halloween decorations turned the streets into a festive wonderland. Families dressed in costumes roamed from house to house, and generous homeowners stocked up on candy to ensure no one left empty-handed. It was supposed to be a fun and carefree night, but no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. That evening, a local woman was home alone, settling in to watch a horror movie to match the spooky atmosphere of the holiday. Outside, the streets were quiet. Most families had already returned home for the night, and she wasn't expecting any more trick-or-treaters. Around 9 p.m., she dozed off on the couch with the television still on, when a sudden, thunderous noise jolted her awake. It sounded like an explosion. At that very moment, her front door, which she had forgotten to lock, swung open. Alarmed, she quickly got up to close it, but what she saw on her doorstep froze her in place. Standing in the doorway was a figure dressed entirely in black, wearing a hockey mask, just like the one from the Friday the 13th horror movie franchise. But instead of wielding a machete, this person was holding a shotgun. For a brief second, it felt like she had stepped into the middle of a movie set or some elaborate Halloween prank. She stood there in shock, uncertain of what to do next. Then, her gaze dropped to the ground, where she noticed a woman lying at the stranger's feet. The woman was writhing in pain, struggling to move. The masked figure stared down at her for a few seconds, then raised the weapon once more. Terrified, the witness bolted for her door, slamming it shut just as two more deafening blasts echoed through the night. She collapsed onto the floor, covering her head with her hands, fearing she might be the next target. But then silence. The eerie stillness was interrupted only by a faint tapping on the window. At first, she ignored it, too afraid to move. But when the knocking came again, she cautiously inched toward the window and, against her better judgment, peered outside. Standing there was a young girl, her face streaked with tears. Without thinking about her own safety, the woman immediately rushed to the door to help. Outside, she spotted another young girl nearby, sitting on the ground in shock, hugging her knees tightly. Without hesitation, she pulled both of them into the house, locked the door, and grabbed her phone to call the emergency services. By then, other neighbors had also heard the commotion and called the authorities. When first responders arrived, they found a woman lying in a pool of blood on the pavement. Despite her critical injuries, she was still alive. Paramedics did everything they could, but on the way to the hospital, she succumbed to her wounds. The victim had no identification on her, and the two young girls found at the scene were too shaken to speak. However, as more neighbors gathered, they quickly recognized the woman, Tiffany, the owner of a local hair salon, and the two little girls as her twin daughters. Authorities immediately contacted the girls' relatives while the sisters were taken to the hospital for evaluation. Thankfully, neither had suffered any physical harm, but they were in deep distress. Mental health professionals were brought in to help them process the traumatic event. Dozens of people had been out celebrating that night, and several recalled seeing the horrifying scene unfold. However, piecing together the full story proved difficult. Many witnesses struggled to believe what they had seen. It had seemed so surreal, almost like a staged performance. Meanwhile, the masked attacker had slipped away into the crowd, blending in among the countless costumed revelers before vanishing without a trace. Some neighbors reported seeing a silver Chevrolet sedan parked near the house, shortly before the attack. Witnesses said the car suddenly sped off after the first loud noise, only to stop a short distance away moments later. It was unclear whether the driver had panicked and fled out of fear, or if they had some connection to what had just happened. Unfortunately, no one had noted the license plate, and no one could confirm if the driver was a man or a woman. To make matters more challenging, there were no security cameras in the area that could have captured the incident. Creating even a rough description of the suspect proved impossible. They were completely covered, wearing a full-body costume, a hood, a hockey mask, and gloves. Because of this, none of the witnesses could determine even basic details like gender or race. The only thing they could agree on was that the attacker was slightly taller than average and had a solid, muscular build. At the crime scene, Tiffany's handbag was found on the ground with its strap torn and its contents scattered. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. However, that theory was quickly dismissed. Cash remained untouched inside the purse, and Tiffany was still wearing several pieces of gold jewelry. Nothing had been taken. Besides, it seemed unlikely that someone would carry out such a violent act over a simple mugging, especially while wielding a shotgun. The level of aggression in the attack suggested a personal motive. But who would want to harm Tiffany, a beloved mother and well-respected member of the community? Investigators started by questioning her former partners, as well as her current boyfriend. However, Tiffany had been separated from both Derek Andrews and Daryl Williams for years, and if there had been any lingering conflicts, they had long since faded. Her current partner, Ben, was a much bigger mystery. Tiffany had kept their relationship private, sharing very little about him with friends and family. Given the secrecy surrounding their romance, detectives decided they needed to question him immediately. Officers were sent to his house around 5 a.m. the following morning. Despite the early hour, every light in Ben's house was on. He was sitting by the front door holding a shotgun. The officers ordered him to drop the weapon and raise his hands. He complied immediately, insisting he had nothing to do with what had happened. Instead, he begged the officers to protect his children. Ben explained that he had found out about the crime hours earlier and had been terrified that the attacker might come for him next. He felt he needed to protect his family. During questioning, Ben revealed that in the months leading up to the incident, Tiffany had confided in him about a stalker, someone she believed was following her. She suspected it might be her ex-fiancé and the father of her twin daughters, Daryl Williams. Their breakup had been far from amicable, and recently, They had been battling for full custody of the girls in court. Ben also provided a solid alibi for Halloween night. He explained that he, Tiffany, and their children had been trick-or-treating together earlier in the evening. Later, he took his children to visit relatives while Tiffany and the twins planned to stop by another neighborhood, pick up some things from home, and then stay the night at his house. But she never arrived. Close to midnight, Tiffany's oldest son called him with the devastating news. Once investigators confirmed Ben's alibi, they released him and allowed him to return home. Now, law enforcement turned its focus to Daryl Williams. Could he have been involved in such a brutal act? Still, detectives had their doubts. Could he really have done something so extreme in front of his own daughters, leaving them with a psychological wound they'd carry for life? On November 1st, officers went to Daryl Williams' last known address, only to find that he no longer lived there. Instead, they were met by his adult daughter, who explained that her father had moved in with his new girlfriend on the other side of town about 6 months earlier. When she was informed of Tiffany's tragic fate, she was visibly shaken. The news had clearly left her in shock. His daughter revealed troubling details about her father's short temper and controlling nature. Daryl was known to be domineering and would become enraged when things didn't go his way. He also had a deep fascination with firearms and in fact owned a shotgun. She went on to explain that her father's breakup with Tiffany had been anything but amicable. He had been extremely resentful about having to pay child support and had fought hard for full custody of the twins, though he knew his chances were slim. However, if Tiffany were no longer alive, he would have had a much stronger case to gain custody of the girls. The daughter admitted that, in her opinion, her father was a ruthless man, one she believed was fully capable of committing such a crime. Following this conversation, investigators headed to Daryl's workplace, a large chemical plant. His supervisor described him as a hard-working employee, someone who could handle the workload of 2 people and was always willing to cover extra shifts. However, Daryl's aggressive personality often led to conflicts with coworkers, sometimes escalating into physical altercations. Interestingly, on the night of November 1st, Daryl had refused to take a last-minute shift change for the first time since he had started working there, citing personal matters. This unusual behavior raised even more suspicion, as it meant he had no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime. Detectives then made their way to the home of Daryl's new girlfriend, a woman named Rosalind. Parked in the driveway was a silver Chevrolet sedan, matching the description of the car seen near the crime scene. When Rosalind opened the door and saw the officers, she became visibly anxious. However, once she learned why they were there, she insisted that Daryl had been with her the entire night and had never left the house. With no physical evidence to detain Daryl, investigators decided to speak with the most important witnesses, Tiffany's daughters. The girls were still in deep shock. Dania barely spoke, suffered from nightmares, and refused to sleep without the lights on. Diamond seemed to be coping better, but whenever the conversation turned to that terrible night, she would break down in tears and shut down. A skilled psychologist was brought in to gently guide the sisters through their trauma, and eventually, they began to open up. The girls revealed that while visiting their father, they had frequently seen a mysterious man come by and hand Daryl folders filled with paperwork. One day, after their father had stepped out, their curiosity got the better of them. They peeked inside the folders and were stunned to find photographs of their home, their mother in different locations around town, and even pictures of Ben's house. It became clear that Daryl had hired a private investigator to track Tiffany. Even more damning was the fact that just 2 days before Tiffany's death, she had won full custody of the twins in court, forcing Daryl to pay child support, something he had been adamantly against. With this new information, police obtained a warrant for Daryl's arrest. Given Daryl's known history with firearms and the likelihood that he would resist arrest, officers decided to apprehend him at work, where security measures were strict, reducing the risk of an armed confrontation. When the officers arrived, Daryl was visibly stunned. He didn't resist, silently allowing them to place him in handcuffs. His only request was to speak with a lawyer. Initially, both he and Rosalind denied any involvement. However, when investigators checked their phone records, GPS data revealed that both had been near the crime scene that night. The first to break was Rosalind. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to testify against Daryl. According to her, she hadn't known exactly what he planned to do. She had simply driven him to the location and waited in the car. When the first loud noise rang out, Rosalind panicked and hit the gas, but after a few seconds she slowed down. allowing Daryl to jump into the car before they sped away. She insisted that the only reason she later gave him an alibi was because she feared for her own life. Daryl Williams was charged with first-degree homicide, a crime that carried the possibility of the death penalty. Desperate to avoid the harshest sentence, he did everything he could to shift the blame. When he learned that Rosalind had testified against him, he tried to turn the tables, claiming that she had been having an affair with his adult son, and that the two of them had conspired behind his back to frame him. In other words, he was willing to accuse his own son of a serious crime just to save himself. Fortunately, investigators quickly debunked his story. A thorough review of evidence confirmed that his son had absolutely no involvement in the events of that night. With no other options left, Daryl eventually agreed to a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In April 2017, at the age of 49, he was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in prison. He would not be eligible for parole for at least 25 years. Makes a difference. Case 3. Human life is a precious gift, something that can never be bought or restored. Unfortunately, the true weight of this realization often comes with age. Yet some people see life as something they can put a price on, taking it without hesitation in pursuit of quick and reckless gain. The story of a young girl named Sofia Martinez sent shockwaves through the quiet city of El Paso, and soon after, the entire nation. She went to a party and then vanished without a trace. Later, the horrifying truth would leave everyone in disbelief. Sofia Maria Martinez was born on November 14, 1981, in El Paso, Texas. She was the family of Juan and Lourdes Martinez. Her parents had immigrated to the United States from Mexico in the late 1970s, searching for a better life. They worked multiple jobs to provide their daughters with everything they needed. Sofia was raised alongside her two sisters, older sister Dulcinea and younger sister Marianne. The girls were always close, forming a strong bond from an early age. When Sofia turned 12, tensions in the family became apparent, and in 1995, her parents divorced. The sisters stayed with their mother, who later remarried a successful man named Iladio Lucio, and had 2 sons with him. One also started a new family shortly after, and over time, his contact with his daughters from his first marriage became less frequent. Sofia never held resentment toward her father, and she formed a wonderful relationship with her stepfather. She grew up to be kind, outgoing, and compassionate, often helping her mother with the younger children and becoming a true support system for them. She shared a deep bond with her younger sister, and they were best friends. At 15, Martinez started working part-time as a sales associate at a local mall, saving up a considerable amount of money over the years. She had always dreamed of owning a car, specifically a bright red sports Pontiac. Her mother and stepfather knew about her dream, so when she turned 18, they gifted her the remaining amount she needed to buy it. In November 1999, Sofia finally drove her brand new car off the dealership lot, a car she had admired for so long. She took great care of it, keeping both the interior and exterior spotless and driving cautiously. The car was her pride, and she never let anyone else drive it. By 2000, Martinez was preparing for graduation. She was excited for the upcoming senior prom, carefully selecting the perfect dress, shoes, and accessories. She and her sister spent weekends shopping, trying on different outfits, planning hairstyles, and choosing the right makeup for the big night. In February, senior yearbook photos were taken, where students posed in traditional graduation caps and gowns. Sofia was beaming with happiness, eagerly looking forward to starting college. She had already set her sights on continuing her education at the prestigious University of Texas, where she planned to major in history with the goal of becoming a teacher. But tragically, her dreams would never come true. Sofia had always been surrounded by friends, but she had never been in a serious relationship. She prioritized school and work over dating, and while she occasionally accepted invitations from young men interested in her, none of those encounters turned into anything meaningful. In early March, her coworker Justin, who worked with her at the mall, suggested setting her up on a blind date with a good friend of his. After some hesitation, she agreed, and they scheduled the date for the evening of Friday, March 10th. They chose a popular nightclub in town, one of the few venues that allowed entry to those 18 and older, unlike most places that required patrons to be 21. On the evening of March 10, 2010, Sofia rushed home after school, eager to get ready for her blind date. She tried on at least 10 different outfits, stepping out each time to hear her family's opinions. In the end, they all agreed that she looked best in a bright red evening dress. It flattered her figure while remaining elegant and not overly revealing. She applied makeup, styled her hair into soft curls, slipped on a pair of heels, and grabbed a small clutch bag. The final touch was her favorite perfume, a scent she absolutely loved. By 10 o'clock, she was fully ready. She stepped into the living room in full glam, giving one last twirl to show off her look. Her family was in awe, certain that Sophia could win over any guy. She, in turn, promised to be home by no later than 2 in the morning, since she had a scheduled work shift at the mall on Saturday. No one was particularly worried. She was responsible and always kept her word. At 10:10 p.m., with a bright smile, Sophia left the house, slid behind the wheel of her beloved red Pontiac, and waved to her family watching from the window. None of them could have imagined that this would be the last time they saw her alive. The next morning, her younger sister, Marianne, peeked into her room and immediately noticed something strange. Sophia wasn't there, and her bed wasn't just neatly made. It looked untouched. It seemed like she had already left for work, but her employee badge was still sitting on the vanity, and her usual work shoes were in the corner by the closet. Marianne told their mother, and at that moment, the phone rang. It was Sophia's employer, calling to report that she had never shown up for her shift, something that had never happened before. Now, her family was truly alarmed and unsure of what to do next. Sophia didn't have a cell phone, which wasn't unusual at the time, so her family started calling landlines of friends, classmates, and coworkers, but no one had seen her since the night before, and they didn't have the number of the guy she was supposed to meet. They also called local hospitals, fearing she might have been in a car accident. By the evening, with no information on her whereabouts, Lourdes went to the police to report her daughter missing. She brought a recent photo of Sophia and gave a detailed description of what she had been wearing when she left home. She also provided full details about the car she was driving, the chilling discovery in the desert. On Saturday, March 11th, in the neighboring state of New Mexico, a red Pontiac was found abandoned about 100 yards off the highway that connected the two states. The passenger side window had a bullet hole, and inside the car, on the seat, steering wheel, and headrest, were dark, dried stains resembling blood. Experienced officers immediately suspected that a crime had taken place, and that the driver was either seriously injured or worse. The vehicle was taken to a forensic lab for examination. However, since the discovery happened in another state, law enforcement had no immediate connection between the car and the missing girl from Texas. After checking the vehicle's registration, authorities confirmed that the red Pontiac belonged to Lourdes Martinez Lucio from Texas. They contacted her to determine whether the car had been stolen, only to learn that it had been driven by her daughter, who had been reported missing the day before. No one could understand how Sophia's car had ended up abandoned in the desert of a neighboring state or where she might have gone. Lourdes insisted that her daughter deeply valued her car and would never abandon it, which meant something must have happened. One theory was that the vehicle had been hijacked and that Sophia may have been injured, but there was still hope that she could be found alive. However, with no immediate leads, law enforcement was left uncertain about where to even begin their search. The next day, on Sunday, March 12th, a group of teenagers walking near the outskirts of El Paso noticed something bright in the desert and decided to take a closer look. As they approached, they discovered the lifeless body of a young woman in a red evening dress. They immediately ran home to inform their parents, who then contacted the police. Within an hour, forensic investigators arrived at the scene. Officers found the young woman lying on her back, her face so badly disfigured that she was unrecognizable. Her dress was soaked in blood and covered in sand. Although no identification was found, police were nearly certain that they had just discovered the body of the missing girl from 2 days earlier. When the Martinez family was notified that a body had been found in the desert, Lourdes refused to believe it. She was convinced that there had been a mistake, that her daughter was still alive. But all doubts vanished when detectives showed her a photograph that had been recovered from the victim's bra, a picture of Sophia holding her youngest brother. Sophia was known to carry photos of her younger siblings in her wallet, but in her final moments, she had placed one close to her heart. Autopsy results and search for evidence. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the head. She had been shot 5 times in the face, with one bullet passing through and later being recovered from the sand at the crime scene. The extent of the injuries left her with no chance of survival. In addition to the gunshot wounds, the body showed clear signs of a struggle, severe bruising, and further evidence of physical aggression. The inner surfaces of her thighs were covered in abrasions and bruises, and forensic examination confirmed internal injuries consistent with an assault. DNA analysis also uncovered biological evidence. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought desperately for her life, but she had been overpowered. None of her personal belongings were found with her, except for the photograph tucked inside her clothing. Due to the extent of the injuries, DNA testing was required to confirm her identity, as even dental records were of no use. Toxicology reports later confirmed that she had no substances in her system at the time of her death. Near the body, investigators discovered multiple shoe prints, most of them blurred, but one clear impression allowed forensic analysts to determine the size and tread pattern of the sole. Inside the car, authorities found no fingerprints except those belonging to Sophia herself. Her purse was also recovered from the vehicle, but her license, keys, and cash had been taken by the perpetrator. The Martinez family was advised to change their door locks and install a security system, as Sophia's killer had access to her home address from her identification and possessed her keys. Her loved ones followed the recommendations, but they lived in fear, knowing that the person responsible for her death could still be out there and might target someone else. DNA samples obtained from the biological evidence left behind by the attacker were uploaded into the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This suggested that the perpetrator had no prior record, making the investigation even more challenging. Authorities also considered the possibility that the suspect was a transient offender, someone who had illegally crossed the border from Mexico, committed the crime, and then fled back, making it even harder to track him down. The first suspects and a crucial lead when investigators learned that Sophia had gone on a blind date the night she disappeared. Arranged by a coworker, they immediately sought to question both men involved. Since her family didn't have their contact information, officers went to her workplace at the mall. Justin, the coworker who had set up the date, was on shift that day and agreed to go to the station for questioning. The second man, Marcus, was also brought in for an interview. He explained that he agreed to meet Sophia at the club, but that she never showed up. The two men had waited for her until around midnight before leaving. Justin only found out that Sophia had gone missing the next day when she didn't show up for work. Both men willingly took polygraph tests to verify their statements, provided DNA samples, and handed over the shoes they had worn that night. The results showed no connection to the crime. Their alibis were solid, as dozens of people had seen them at the club. During a more thorough inspection of Sophia's car, officers found a crumpled ATM receipt that had fallen under the driver's seat. The timestamp showed that at 10:23 p.m., she had withdrawn $20 from an ATM just a few blocks from her home. This became a significant lead because the area had surveillance cameras at the ATM and on surrounding buildings. The final moments caught on camera. Investigators reviewed footage from all available cameras, and what they saw was shocking. The crime had been captured from multiple angles, allowing authorities to piece together what had happened. At 10:22 p.m., a red Pontiac pulled up to the ATM. The driver's side window rolled down, and a young woman withdrew $20 from her account. The footage clearly showed that she was alone in the car. After taking the cash, Sophia lingered for a moment, using her compact mirror to touch up her lipstick. At that moment, a figure dressed entirely in black with a hood pulled over his head crept up behind the car. Sophia didn't notice him until he was already at her window. Without hesitation, he pulled out a firearm and shot her in the head. But he hadn't intended to end her life, only to wound and intimidate her. The bullet grazed her cheek, clipped her nose, and exited through the passenger side window. A moment later, the injured Sophia, holding a tissue to her bleeding face, withdrew an additional $200 from her account. The car then began to pull away from the ATM, with the assailant now inside, holding the weapon to the back of her head. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared from the camera's view, and what happened next remained unknown. It's important to remember that this occurred in the early 2000s, when surveillance camera quality was far from what it is today. The footage was grainy and lacked detail, making it impossible to create a composite sketch of the suspect. All that could be determined was that the attacker was a white male of average height and slim build, possibly with facial hair. This information, along with clips of the attack, was broadcast on local television, warning residents of the danger and asking anyone who recognized the suspect to come forward. A long and frustrating investigation. Following the news segment, Police received dozens of calls, but none provided any useful leads. As time passed, the investigation stalled, no new evidence emerged, and authorities were left with more questions than answers. At the end of March, a man contacted the police, stating that he had found a driver's license near the location where Sophia's body had been discovered 2 weeks earlier. The document belonged to a local woman, and authorities feared she might have met the same fate. However, upon reaching out to her, they found that she was safe and unharmed. When officers arrived at her home, she explained that her purse had been stolen earlier that month at a shopping mall, the same mall where Sophia had worked. Investigators speculated that the perpetrator might have been stalking potential victims before attacking, and shared this information with the media to warn other women. However, the very next day, a young man turned himself in, admitting that he was the one who had stolen the purse. After seeing the news report, he panicked, fearing that police would connect him to a crime he hadn't committed. He voluntarily provided a DNA sample and was ruled out as a suspect in Sophia's case. By July 2000, the investigation had reached a standstill. In an effort to generate new leads, authorities offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the killer's capture. Soon after, the Martinez family launched a fundraising campaign to increase the amount. Their efforts were supported not only by friends and concerned citizens, but also by local organizations. By August, the reward had grown to $55,000. Despite these efforts, 6 months had passed since the tragedy, and no new leads had emerged. Even a feature on America's Most Wanted failed to produce any significant breakthroughs, a sudden twist, and the first real lead. On September 30th, 2000, a young woman called the police, claiming she knew who had taken Sophia's life and was willing to provide details in exchange for the reward money. While false tipsters seeking financial gain had come forward before, this time the witness claimed to have physical evidence. The caller was Heather Napawaski, a 20-year-old mother of 2. According to her, the crime had been committed by her boyfriend, Michael Jacques, and their mutual friend, William Berkeley. As proof, she handed over a severely burned driver's license belonging to Sophia Martinez. Heather stated that she had been too afraid to speak out earlier, fearing retaliation, but with Michael recently incarcerated and no way to support her children, she had decided to come forward, both to help the investigation and to secure the reward. Heather told detectives that in early March she had been hospitalized due to kidney complications. At the time, William was temporarily staying with her and Michael. All 3 were unemployed and struggling financially. On March 10th, William visited the hospital and pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. Heather overheard parts of their discussion and realized they were planning something illegal, but she assumed it was related to selling prohibited substances, which they had been involved in before. She didn't question them further. Shortly after, both men left, taking a box of latex gloves from a medical supply cabinet. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Michael returned to Heather's hospital room and told her they had managed to get some money. According to Jacques, he had hidden near an ATM and signaled to William when a lone driver pulled up. Once the money was withdrawn, William allegedly approached the vehicle, threatened the driver with a firearm, took the cash, and ordered them to step out of the car. He then got behind the wheel and drove off. Even at this point, detectives knew this version of events didn't align with the actual crime, but for now they let Heather continue her story. After midnight, a nurse entered the hospital room and told Michael that someone was waiting for him downstairs. It was William who said they needed to get rid of the car. The 2 men left in separate vehicles, drove to the neighboring state, abandoned the Pontiac in the desert, and then returned home in Jacques' car. A day later, Heather was discharged from the hospital. She was anxious, wondering whether the injured person would report the crime to the police. To calm her down, Berkeley showed her a driver's license belonging to Sophia Martinez, pointing out that it contained her home address. He casually remarked that if necessary, the victim could be intimidated into staying silent. Then, without hesitation, he tossed the license into a smoldering grill and watched indifferently as it melted before heading off to bed. A few days later, when Heather saw the news report about Sophia's case, everything clicked. She immediately recognized Berkeley on the ATM surveillance footage. She also realized why he had suddenly changed his appearance, shaving off his beard and cutting his hair down to the scalp. When she confronted Michael about his involvement, he ordered her to stay quiet. Heather retrieved the burned license from the grill and kept it hidden. She also noticed that Michael had a set of car keys with a Pontiac logo keychain, though she didn't know what became of them. In August, Berkeley moved out of their home, and in September, Michael was arrested on charges related to distributing prohibited substances. Only then, feeling safer, Heather decided to tell the truth and make some money in the process. Following Heather's statement, investigators immediately brought in 23-year-old Michael Jacques for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't deny involvement and agreed to share his side of the story. According to him, he had nothing to do with Sophia's death, but admitted to helping his friend cover up the crime. Michael stated that both he and William were desperate for cash and decided to rob someone at an ATM. When the red Pontiac pulled into the parking lot, Jacques saw that the driver was a young girl and attempted to call off the plan. However, his partner misinterpreted the signal as a go-ahead. Michael was aware that William had a firearm, but claimed he never imagined he would actually use it. The situation escalated within seconds, and before he knew it, the car had sped off into the night. He waited for about half an hour, but when William didn't return, he went back to the hospital to be with Heather. He insisted that he had no idea what had happened to Sophia after that, and denied knowing about the assault and the killing. However, he admitted to helping dispose of the car. He later learned more details, but chose not to turn his friend in, knowing he would also face consequences. One of the key pieces of evidence, a set of car keys, was later found on the roof of Jacques' house, exactly where he had thrown them. The primary suspect, 20-year-old William Berkeley, was arrested in early October at his parents' home. He had no prior criminal record, but those who knew him described a long history of aggression and cruelty. Since his school years, he had physically attacked classmates, former girlfriends, and even his own mother, yet none of them had ever filed a police report. At the same time, he was exceptionally talented, creating artwork that had even been displayed in galleries. During his initial interrogation, Berkeley avoided details but admitted to robbing Sophia, claiming he needed money. However, when questioned about the assault, he insisted that the encounter had been consensual and that he had accidentally shot her afterward. In later interrogations, once he realized the gravity of the situation, Berkeley began changing his story. He now portrayed himself as a victim, claiming he was merely carrying out a scheme orchestrated by Michael. According to him, it was Jacques who had chosen the car, assuming that the owner of a Pontiac would have a sizable amount of money in her account. However, to their disappointment, Sophia only had $220, an amount that, in their eyes, became the price of her life. The trial and sentencing leading up to the trial, the former friends desperately tried to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence against Berkeley was overwhelming. During a search of his home, authorities recovered the murder weapon, a .22 caliber handgun. His DNA was found on the victim, and in his bedroom, investigators discovered a pair of sneakers that perfectly matched the footprints left at the crime scene. On April 7, 2002, Berkeley was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death by lethal injection. The sentence was carried out in the spring of 2010. Throughout the years leading up to his execution, he never showed remorse for his actions. On November 3, 2002, Michael Jacques was also found guilty of conspiracy to commit a crime and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. As for Heather, she received the promised $55,000 reward, but the money brought her no happiness. She lost custody of her children, and at the age of 35, she passed away due to complications from a chronic kidney condition. Case 4. They say a successful family business can turn a couple into a powerful and thriving dynasty. But just as easily, it can become the catalyst for a high-profile breakup and courtroom battles. At first glance, building a business with your partner sounds like a dream: complete trust, minimal risk of betrayal, and all the money stays in the family. But what happens when that modest venture suddenly grows into a multi-million or even multi-billion-dollar empire? Will it bring the couple closer together or spark conflict, rivalry, and deep resentment? The case of Andrea MacDonald was both complex and unsettling, even though from the start it seemed fairly clear who was responsible for the crime. She vanished from her own home without a trace, and almost no one believed she was still alive. Still, without a body and with barely any solid evidence against the suspect, the situation was stuck. Months passed with no resolution, and the person responsible appeared to be on the verge of walking free. Then, just when hope was nearly lost, a local rancher made a chilling discovery that changed everything. Andrea Martina MacDonald, née Anderson, was born on February 18, 1990, in the small coastal town of Port Antonio, Jamaica. She was the eldest of two daughters raised in a modest household by Inmarine Smith and Desmond Anderson. From a young age, Andren was known for her outgoing personality, natural charm, and striking looks. She had plenty of friends and often drew admiration from those around her. While still in high school, Andren became close with a young man named Andre MacDonald. He was 10 years older than her and, like Andren, was born and raised in Jamaica. Andre Austin MacDonald was born on December 22, 1981. He was the only child shared between Marlena and Everton MacDonald. His father had previously been married to a woman named Camilla, who passed away early, prompting Everton to remarry. Andre's parents eventually separated while he was still in school, and his father later moved to the United States, eventually settling down for a third time with a woman named Hannah Hamilton. In the early 2000s, Andre relocated to Florida to live with his father. He was accepted into the International Technical University, where he earned a degree in engineering. However, instead of pursuing a career in that field, Andre chose a different path. He enrolled in military training, signed a contract, and went on to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. Throughout his time in military, Andre kept in close contact with Andren. The two would talk often, message each other, and meet up whenever Andre returned to Jamaica to visit his mother. Over time, their bond deepened, turning into something meaningful and long-term. Eventually, they realized they couldn't imagine life apart. As soon as Andren finished high school, she moved to the U.S. to be with Andre. About a year later, they had a small wedding, inviting only their closest loved ones. Shortly after tying the knot, Andre received new orders and was transferred from sunny Florida to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Andren wasted no time building her future. She enrolled at the University of Texas, earning a degree in economics. In 2013, the couple welcomed a daughter they named Elena. Around the same time, they ventured into the business world, opening their first assisted living facility. Their idea quickly gained traction. Before long, they launched a second facility in another city. Within just a few years, their growing network of care homes was bringing in a significant income. Andre was still committed to his military duties and frequently traveled across the country on assignments. Meanwhile, Andren took the lead in managing the day-to-day operations of their multi-million-dollar business. The couple purchased a beautiful home with a pool in a high-end neighborhood in Behar County, owned multiple luxury vehicles, and had plans to expand their business into neighboring states. In 2016, following the passing of her father, Andren brought her mother over from Jamaica. Her mom moved into the couple's home, helping around the house and looking after Elena when both parents were busy. A few years later, the couple purchased her a small but comfortable house nearby, along with a personal vehicle as a gift. By early 2019, 37-year-old Andre, who held the rank of major in the U.S. Air Force, decided to transition into the reserves. He wanted to remain in San Antonio, spend more time with his family, and take a more active role in their growing business to ease the workload on Andren. Their enterprise was booming. Their network of assisted living facilities had expanded across the state and was valued at close to $1 billion. From the outside, the MacDonalds appeared to have it all. They were successful, wealthy, raising their bright and beloved daughter and managing a thriving business. But behind the curtain of prosperity, tensions had been building, problems that most people had no idea about. On Friday, March 1st, 2019, 29-year-old Andren didn't show up to work. Her phone was off, was extremely out of character. Her assistant and best friend, Caroline Goner, quickly became concerned. After several failed attempts to reach Andren, Caroline and two other coworkers decided to go to the MacDonald residence to make sure everything was okay. Caroline knocked on the door for a long time, but no one answered. Refusing to leave without answers, she decided to walk around the house to check the property. That's when she spotted something alarming in the backyard, a burnt area with a zipper partially visible in the ashes. It looked like someone had been burning clothes, but who would do that? And why? Nothing else seemed immediately suspicious from the outside. When Caroline tugged on the back door, she found it unlocked and cautiously stepped inside. She called out loudly for both Andren and Andre, but got no reply. The house was quiet, almost as if the couple had simply stepped out. But something didn't feel right. In the bathroom, she noticed strange streaks on the light switch that looked like dried blood. There were also a few dark stains on the floor that raised serious concerns. Caroline captured everything she saw on her phone and called local authorities to report what she had found. Officers quickly arrived and began searching the house. What they discovered only deepened their concerns. The carpet in the master bedroom had been thoroughly scrubbed with what seemed like a large amount of industrial-strength cleaner, the sharp chemical odors still lingering in the air. There were faint, cleaned-up blood spots on the floor and another smear on the doorframe. Detectives suspected the home could be the scene of a serious crime, but the limited traces of blood left room for hope that Andrin might still be alive. Andre wasn't answering his phone, and no one knew where he was. The whereabouts of 6-year-old Elena were also unclear at first, but authorities soon confirmed she was safe, staying at her paternal grandmother's house. All 3 vehicles owned by the couple were accounted for. 2 were parked outside, and the third, a Chevrolet Malibu, was in the garage. It was this car that piqued the officers' interest. It was covered in dust, as if it had recently traveled along dirt roads, and small gravel particles were lodged in the tires. There were no obvious signs of damage or visible blood, but the vehicle's condition was suspicious. While investigators were still going over the house, the man of the house, Andre, suddenly showed up at the front door. He looked visibly anxious and shaken, seemingly confused about why law enforcement was on his property. When asked where he had been and what had happened, Andre claimed he had spent the entire night searching for his wife. He listed several hospitals. He said he had visited to check if Andrin had been admitted. A follow-up confirmed that Andre had indeed stopped by the medical facilities he mentioned, but not until the following morning. Moreover, at one of the hospitals, when the front desk staff mentioned that someone with the last name McDonald had been checked in, Andre reportedly turned pale, began stepping back, and quickly walked away, without staying to find out that it was just someone with the same surname. From the start, his behavior raised concerns. Officers decided to bring him in for questioning to hear his version of events. Andre told them he and Andrin had gotten into a domestic dispute, after which he left the house to cool off. When he returned, she was gone. He said he tried calling her several times, and when he got no response, he took their daughter to his mother's home and continued searching for Andrin. Tracking his movements proved difficult. His phone had been switched off since the previous evening and remained off until his return. When questioned about why his phone was off, Andre suddenly changed his tone and said he wouldn't answer any more questions without a lawyer. By that point, it was clear to investigators that something wasn't adding up. But with no solid evidence yet, they had no choice but to release him after the initial interview. He was issued a travel restriction order and placed under discreet surveillance, along with his residence. Despite being under watch, Andre managed to slip away from authorities for nearly 12 hours. It was later discovered that earlier that same day, he had made a string of troubling purchases at various hardware stores. He paid in cash for items including a shovel, large heavy-duty trash bags, a small hatchet, work gloves, duct tape, and fire starter fluid. Andre appeared to be trying to avoid leaving a trail, keeping his phone off and making purchases without using a credit card. Still, law enforcement was able to track him down via security camera footage from those stores. Meanwhile, forensic testing confirmed that the blood traces found in the home belonged to Andrin. With suspicions growing stronger, police decided to detain Andre for further questioning and obtained a warrant to conduct a more thorough search of the home, including the seizure and review of all digital devices. During the time he had briefly vanished, Andre had returned home, but didn't stay long. He quickly left again, unaware that officers were now trailing him. He made a stop at a gun shop, where he purchased a large-caliber handgun and a significant amount of ammunition. He paid in cash again, but just as unexpectedly, after completing the transaction, he turned around and walked out, leaving the firearm and ammunition sitting on the store counter. The man appeared completely detached, his eyes vacant, his movements erratic, as if he'd lost all grip on reality. But seasoned officers weren't convinced. To them, it looked more like an act, a calculated attempt to come off as mentally unstable, potentially laying the groundwork for a future defense. Former military officer Andre was arrested just as he exited the store. He didn't resist. This time, formal charges were filed against him, and during a physical inspection, investigators noticed fresh scratches on his hands and forearms, marks that looked like they had been made by fingernails. Andre failed to provide a clear explanation, though everyone present understood the likely cause: struggle. Nearly 48 hours had passed since Andre was last seen. Given the growing body of circumstantial evidence, it was becoming increasingly difficult to believe she might still be alive. A massive search effort was launched, involving law enforcement, volunteers, and hundreds of concerned citizens. Teams combed through the surrounding areas in and around San Antonio, focusing especially on the rural regions of Bexar County, hoping to find anything that could help move the case forward. Unfortunately, nothing useful turned up, not in the fields, not in the wooded areas, and not in the urban zones. Even a full review of the digital devices seized from the home, including a phone and tablet, yielded no promising leads. But when investigators conducted a second, more detailed search of the vehicles and garage, the case took a dramatic turn. First, they found newly purchased tools and supplies that matched items Andre had bought at various hardware stores. Then, inside the trunk of a Porsche Macan, Andre's car, they discovered an old hammer wrapped in plastic. It had strange, dark stains on it, and several long strands of hair stuck to its head. Forensic analysis confirmed that the hammer bore blood and tissue matching Andre's DNA. The strands of hair were hers too. However, the handle had been wiped clean, no fingerprints. When confronted, Andre denied ever seeing the hammer before and claimed someone must have planted it in his car. Despite the mounting evidence, Andre posted bail, which had been set at $500,000, a sum he paid without delay, and was released shortly after. Once back home, he did not participate in the ongoing search efforts. Instead, he continued to assert the same version of events. The two had an argument he left to cool down, and when he came back, Andre was gone. According to him, he had tried to reach her afterward, sending both voice and text messages. Some of those messages, found on his phone, included emotional pleas, telling her their daughter was crying and asking her to come home. All of them were sent around midnight. After that, the phone was turned off again. The next morning, Andre dropped Elena off at his mother's house, and by his account, began searching for Andre. As the search for Andre continued with no progress, and investigators struggled to piece together what exactly had happened, detectives decided to dig deeper into the McDonald family's background. It didn't take long to uncover that the couple's picture-perfect image was just that, an image. Beneath the surface, their relationship was strained, and serious tension had been brewing for quite some time. Though they had built a thriving business together, one that was rapidly expanding and bringing in a substantial income, most of the day-to-day operations had been handled by Andre, especially while Andre was serving in the military. Back in 2016, when Andre was stationed in Alabama for 6 months, the emotional distance between them grew. Just before he was set to return, Andre messaged him, saying it would be better if they went their separate ways, and that he didn't need to come back. Upon returning home, Andre learned that during his time away, Andre had been in a relationship with a man named O'Brien, someone she had known since her early days in Jamaica. This man had a reputation as a dangerous figure in the local criminal underworld. The two reconnected during one of Andre's visits to the island, and their relationship reignited. He began traveling to Texas to visit her, and the two decided they wanted to be together. The couple filed for divorce. Under Texas law, their assets and business would have to be divided equally, a point of serious contention for both. Andre believed she deserved a larger share since she had been the one managing the operations, while Andre insisted everything was his, as he had funded the initial startup. About 6 months later, the divorce proceedings were paused. It seemed the couple had reconciled, choosing to give their marriage another try for the sake of their young daughter. But despite the outward signs of stability, tensions lingered. Caroline, Andre's closest friend, and the first to raise the alarm after her disappearance, told investigators that Andre had always been controlling and manipulative. He believed the business, the home, and even Andre herself belonged to him, reasoning that he had brought her to the U.S., helped her obtain citizenship, paid for her college education, and financed the launch of their first care facility. Not long before she vanished, Andre confided in Caroline, saying, "If anything ever happens to me, just know it was Andre." Andre had long opposed Andre's trips back to Jamaica, knowing she would meet with her former lover. This was a constant source of conflict between them, but Andre continued to make her own choices. Then, just 2 weeks before she disappeared, Andre discovered that Andre had quietly registered a new company in her name and transferred part of their shared assets into it. That revelation likely felt like a betrayal, and may have been the final spark that pushed everything over the edge. On July 11, 2019, 4.5 months after Andre vanished, local farmer Clinton Clend was walking through his large property on the outskirts of San Antonio. The land wasn't fully cultivated, and some areas had become overgrown. Clinton was surveying the grounds, preparing for future maintenance, when he suddenly caught a strong, unpleasant odor, something unmistakably linked to decomposition. Assuming it was a dead animal, he followed the scent, planning to bury or remove whatever he found. In the tall grass, he first noticed a skull and bones that appeared to belong to a cow. Scattered branches were nearby, but beneath them, he discovered the true source of the odor, a nearly fully decomposed human body. Clinton immediately contacted law enforcement. The remains were recovered and transported to the lab for analysis. The body was unclothed, and aside from confirming it was a woman, there wasn't much else investigators could initially determine. Still, given the timing and location, many suspected this was the missing Andre MacDonald. DNA testing soon confirmed those suspicions. However, due to the advanced state of decomposition, the medical examiner couldn't conclusively identify a cause of passing. Pathologists did note trauma to the jawbone and a fracture at the base of the skull, injuries consistent with being struck by the same hammer previously found in Andre's car. There was another disturbing detail. Much of the woman's hair was missing. At first, this raised eyebrows, but when examiners noticed partial burns on her right hand, they concluded someone had attempted to destroy the body by fire, likely to eliminate evidence. With this discovery, Andre was formally charged with the crime and taken back into custody. Interestingly, the area where the remains were found had already been searched multiple times by both law enforcement and volunteers. But the specific spot was located on private property, behind a fence, about 60 feet from the road, off limits without a warrant, which is why it hadn't been searched earlier. When Andre was informed that Andre's remains had been found, and that the evidence suggested she had suffered blunt force trauma, he suddenly changed his approach. He told investigators he was ready to tell the full story, in exchange for a lighter sentence. After consulting with his attorney, Andre presented a new narrative, portraying himself as a victim of circumstances. He spoke of his wife's infidelity, her efforts to take over their business and run it with her new partner, and most importantly, his fear that she would take their daughter away from him in the event of a divorce. According to Andre had recently brought up the idea of ending their marriage again, and had allegedly threatened to leave him with nothing and take Elena with her. That evening, they had a heated argument. He claimed that Andre became aggressive and started hitting him, forcing him to defend himself. During the struggle, he said she sustained a minor cut. Andre admitted to pushing her, saying she fell, and that he then kicked her multiple times and stepped on her chest to prevent her from getting back up. At that moment, Andre heard footsteps in the hallway and the voice of his daughter Elena calling out for her mom. Panicking, he rushed out of the room before Elena could enter, scooped her up, carried her back to her room, and told her that mom would come check on her later. Andre insisted that when he left the room, Andre was still alive, lying on the floor and only slightly injured. However, when he returned, she was in the same spot, this time unresponsive. He believed that he may have unintentionally caused a fatal outcome by putting too much pressure on her chest during the struggle. Realizing the severity of what had happened, Andre said he panicked. He removed Andre's clothing and burned it in the backyard. Then he transported her body outside the city and left it on private land behind a fence, near the remains of a cow. Later, he returned home and sent multiple texts to Andre's phone, pleading with her to come back, in an attempt to create the appearance that she had simply left after a disagreement. After that, he woke Elena and drove her to his mother's house, asking her to look after her granddaughter while he searched for his missing wife. To further sell the story, he visited several hospitals, pretending to look for Andre. At one point, he nearly fainted when he heard that a woman with the same last name had been admitted. By the time police brought him in for questioning the following morning, they still didn't have strong evidence linking him to a crime, so he was released. Once free, Andre began seriously contemplating how to make sure the body was never discovered. He even considered dismembering and burning it, then scattering the remains in different places. That's why he went out and bought a hatchet, a shovel, fire starter fluid, and heavy-duty plastic bags. The next day, he returned to where he had left Andre, but when the time came, he couldn't bring himself to go through with his plan. Instead, he poured flammable liquid on the body and lit a fire, but it fizzled out quickly, only burning off the hair and partially charring one of her hands. According to Andre, the failure left him in a state of complete despair. In a fit of rage, he grabbed an old hammer from his car and began striking the body before coming to his senses and stopping. He then covered the remains with branches and cow bones. When questioned about why he went to a gun store and bought a pistol and ammunition, only to abandon the items at the counter, Andre claimed he couldn't explain it. He said his mind was clouded, that he hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, and that he was no longer thinking clearly. The trial was delayed significantly due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, with hearings finally beginning in January 2023. The defense team focused on portraying Andre as someone trapped by the circumstances around him. His attorneys argued that Andre and her romantic partner were allegedly conspiring to remove Andre from the picture entirely, so they wouldn't have to split assets during the divorce. Andre McDonald's detailed account of what happened to his wife could never be fully verified due to the advanced state of decomposition in which her body was found. Forensic specialists were unable to determine an exact cause of death, or even confirm whether the injuries had been inflicted while Andre was still alive, or if, as the defendant claimed, he had struck the body with a hammer after she had already passed. What was clear, however, was that for 5 months Andre had remained silent, hoping to cover up the crime and avoid responsibility. In February 2023, to the shock of many, Andre McDonald was acquitted of first-degree charges. Instead, the jury found him guilty of manslaughter and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. Full custody of Elena was awarded to her maternal grandmother. In a striking development later that same year, Andre's father, Everton McDonald, was put on trial in Jamaica for the crime of his third wife, Hannah Hamilton. Even more disturbingly, this new investigation brought attention to the suspicious death of his first wife, Camilla, an incident that had long been brushed aside. Authorities now believe that Everton may have been involved in her passing as well. If convicted, he could face life behind bars. This chilling twist raised the possibility that Andre may not have been the first in his family to commit such a serious act, suggesting a legacy of violence that spanned generations. Case 5. Scientists agree that aggressive behavior in teens isn't something they're born with or inherit. It's shaped by their surroundings, the way they're raised, and the quality of their relationships with adults. This doesn't apply to diagnosed mental health conditions, but it's crucial to remember that every person, no matter their age, needs love, support, care, and understanding. Emotional and physical mistreatment can sometimes push someone to a very dark place, even turn them into someone capable of terrifying actions. The case of the Hollowell family is unusually complex and far from typical in every way. At first glance, they seemed like an average household, nothing out of the ordinary. Their co-workers and neighbors couldn't say a bad word about them. But somehow, trouble seemed to follow them. Strange, sometimes downright disturbing. Things happened around this family. When the mother was found lifeless in their home under chilling and suspicious circumstances, attention quickly turned to her sons. As detectives dug deeper into the case, they began to uncover a string of unsettling family secrets, the kind that painted a very different picture of the quiet, seemingly normal life the Hollowells had appeared to lead. For several generations, the Hollowell family lived in a small town in Marin County, nestled in the southwestern part of California. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they did own a spacious 2-story home in the unincorporated community of Inverness, right along the scenic shores of Lake Cedro. The property had been in the family since the mid-1950s, meaning 3 generations had lived under that same roof. It's worth noting that only about 15 homes sat along that lake, and the residents had lived side by side for many years. This created a tight-knit, close community where everyone knew each other well. Crime was virtually non-existent, and strangers were a rare sight. The area was surrounded by lush greenery, making it feel almost like a hidden paradise. In 1965, after many years of unsuccessful attempts to become parents, the Hollowell couple made the decision to adopt a baby girl whose biological parents had given up their rights. She was just 3 months old when they brought her home and gave her the name Denise. From that moment on, she became the center of their universe. She was raised in an environment full of love and care, received a strong education, and had the freedom to pursue her biggest passion, extreme sports. At the age of 20, still a college student, Denise got married for the first time to a fellow student named Richard. The two shared a love for skydiving, and in fact, on the day of their wedding, the couple and their witnesses did a group jump. During freefall, Denise and Richard exchanged rings midair, but the excitement of their adventurous lifestyle couldn't hold their relationship together. Like many young couples, they simply weren't ready for the realities of married life, the everyday struggles and compromises. They divorced 2 years after their wedding and eventually lost all contact with each other. In 1998, at 33, Denise got married for the second time. This time, her partner was Benjamin, who was nearly a decade older. The couple hoped to start a family, but Denise was diagnosed with health complications that made pregnancy impossible. Rather than give up on becoming parents, they took a less traditional route. Inspired by Hollywood star Angelina Jolie in 2006, the then 41-year-old Denise and 51-year-old Benjamin adopted a boy named Carlos. He had just turned 4, was originally from Guatemala, and the adoption process had been both costly and challenging. A year later, they adopted another boy, Angel, from Honduras. Another complicated, expensive process that demanded a lot from the couple emotionally and financially. Despite now having 2 sons, Denise and Benjamin's marriage continued to strain. In 2012, they made the decision to separate. After the divorce, the boys remained with Denise, while Benjamin moved to another state. He never stayed in touch and showed no further interest in the boys' lives. By the time Denise's adoptive parents had passed, she inherited the lakefront home on Lake Cedro and made the decision to move there with her sons. She worked as a middle school teacher in Marin County, a modest job that didn't bring in much money, but it seemed to be enough to get by. People who knew her described her as educated, intelligent, and non-confrontational. She was respected at work, and neighbors had nothing negative to say about her. Raising 2 adopted sons on her own proved to be incredibly difficult for Denise. Without a father figure in the picture, the boys began to spiral, and she struggled to keep them in line. Angel, in particular, caused the most concern. Even in elementary school, he refused to follow rules or listen to authority. He often had explosive outbursts and episodes of intense aggression. This wasn't typical mischief or rebellion. Angel would lash out at other students, and his behavior was sometimes so extreme that it posed a real danger to both himself and others. Carlos had his own issues, though his behavior was less overt. He was more withdrawn and didn't pick fights openly, but if he sensed a confrontation coming, he wouldn't hesitate to throw the first punch. Carlos struggled to make connections with peers and had very few friends, but he found some solace in athletic activities. The brothers never got along. Despite growing up in the same home for years, they didn't bond. In fact, they were openly hostile toward each other. Their fights were brutal and frequent, and it was clear they harbored deep resentment. Still, Denise didn't seem to view this as a serious problem. She never sought outside help or involved any professionals. By the time Angel was around 9 or 10 years old, things had taken a turn for the worse. He began skipping school regularly, and teachers reported repeated incidents of aggression. He also started stealing. Around the same time, he ran away from home for the first time, disappearing for several days before returning. After that, it became a pattern. He would vanish for days at a time and stopped attending school altogether. In September 2016, officials from Child Welfare Services paid a visit to the Hollowell residence following ongoing complaints from teachers about the boy's behavior and Angel's repeated disappearances. Their goal was to check on the home environment and speak with the family directly, but what they found was unsettling. Denise was home with the boys and clearly wasn't expecting any visitors. Still, she allowed the protection worker inside, as she had no legal reason to deny them entry. One of the first things that stood out was the condition of the windows. The lower floor windows were partially covered from the inside with cardboard, making it impossible to see what was going on inside from the outside. Inside the house where Denise lived with her 2 sons, something felt off from the very beginning. There were no signs of typical hobbies or pastimes one might expect. No toys, no bikes, no rollerblades. The place was almost barren, with only the most basic furniture, all of it left over from her late parents. The kitchen had an old refrigerator and a worn-out washing machine. Denise had a bed in her own room, but her sons were sleeping on inflatable mattresses tossed directly onto the floor. The most shocking discovery, however, came when officials inspected Angel's room. It didn't resemble a typical bedroom at all. It looked more like solitary confinement. The heavy wooden door had not only a basic turn lock on the inside, but also a large metal bolt installed on the outside. There was a small hatch built into the door, which could be locked as well, apparently used to pass food and water inside without opening the door completely. The room was dimly lit. The windows had been fully covered with cardboard, blocking out all natural light. In the corner, Angel sat quietly on a worn-out mattress. In the opposite corner stood a foul-smelling plastic bucket, about 1/3 full of human waste. The stench matched the conditions. Angel, however, wasn't scared. He seemed angry. All 3, Denise and her 2 sons, were immediately taken to the local police station. A child psychologist spoke with the boys, while Denise was questioned about the disturbing situation at home. She explained that locking Angel in the room was something she did for safety reasons, to prevent the brothers from fighting and to keep the younger one from running away again. Her explanation didn't sit well with the officers, especially once Angel began to describe his side of the story. He claimed that Carlos frequently hit him, humiliated him, and even threatened to end his life. Their mother, according to Angel, never stepped in or defended him. Feeling unsafe, he had tried running away several times. After each escape, Denise began locking him in the room, sometimes for days at a time. He said he had no access to a real bathroom and was given only a plastic bucket to relieve himself. Food and water were passed through the small window in the door, which otherwise stayed locked. Following this testimony, Denise was placed under arrest. Authorities decided to temporarily place both boys in protective care while searching for new adoptive families. A judge was expected to determine what would happen next. But then, something unexpected happened. Carlos began defending his adoptive mother. According to Carlos, his younger brother posed a serious risk, not only to himself, but to everyone around him. No one seemed capable of managing Angel's behavior, and their mom, he said, was simply doing what she could to keep everyone safe. Carlos shared that at one point, Angel had brought a knife to school and came dangerously close to harming a classmate. Thankfully, no one was hurt. His account was later confirmed by school staff, who admitted they had covered up the incident at the request of the classmate's parent, who also worked at the school. Carlos continued to defend his adoptive mother passionately, insisting he wanted to go back home and live with her just like before. During every hearing, he stood by Denise and pleaded with the court not to strip her of her parental rights. Other witnesses, including relatives and neighbors, couldn't offer much insight. They all described the Hollowells as a decent family and considered Denise a caring and responsible parent. Eventually, the case seemed to lean in her favor. Denise didn't appear to be guilty of any wrongdoing. It looked more like she was simply overwhelmed and unable to cope with her younger son's deeply troubling behavior. Angel was eventually placed in a psychiatric facility, then transferred to a group home for high-risk youths, and later placed with a new adoptive family. Denise was fully cleared of all accusations and reinstated as Carlos' legal guardian. As he had hoped, Carlos returned to the lake house and resumed what seemed like a normal life. On the evening of July 13, 2019, around 6 p.m., a panicked teenager called Marin County Emergency Services, reporting that his mother had been attacked. The 17-year-old was distraught, pleading for officers and paramedics to arrive quickly. He waited for them at the end of the driveway. Carlos led responders into his mother's bedroom, and what they saw was horrifying. Denise was lying on her side on the bed, and lodged in the back of her head was an axe. Blood had soaked through the pillow, creating a massive red stain. When first responders arrived, she was still showing faint signs of life, but despite their efforts, she passed away en route to the hospital. Carlos was the only witness to the incident, and gave a story that raised more questions than answers. He claimed that earlier that day, he and his mom had attended a relative's funeral in a neighboring town, followed by a memorial meal. They returned home around 4:30 p.m., both exhausted, and decided to lie down for a rest. Carlos said he quickly fell asleep. About an hour later, around 6 o'clock p.m., he woke up to strange noises and the sound of the dogs barking. Looking out the window, he noticed that the gate to the dog run was open, and their dogs were running loose in the yard. Concerned, he went to check on his mom, and that's when he discovered the horrifying scene. He immediately contacted emergency services, hoping she could still be helped. When investigators asked Carlos who might have had a reason to hurt his mother, he didn't hesitate. He named Angel. According to him, only his younger brother harbored enough anger and resentment toward Denise to actually want to harm her. Carlos also admitted that he believed Angel was capable of hurting him too, but for some unknown reason, didn't follow through. He added that he no longer felt safe and feared what might happen next. After speaking with Carlos, authorities moved quickly to locate and question Angel, who was now considered the primary suspect, but that proved to be more difficult than expected. No one seemed to know where the 15-year-old was. Since being removed from the Hollowell household by Child Welfare Services, Angel had cycled through several foster homes, but never managed to settle anywhere. He struggled with social interaction, couldn't get along with others, displayed ongoing aggression, and frequently ran away. About a year before the incident, Angel had run away from yet another foster home, and this time he completely vanished. His whereabouts remained unknown, and now investigators feared he may have returned to carry out an act of revenge against the woman with whom he had always had a difficult and volatile relationship. There were a number of troubling details at the scene that seemed to support that theory. There were no signs of forced entry. Angel had always gotten along better with the dogs than with people, so it wasn't surprising that they didn't raise alarm. The weapon used in the attack, an axe, was taken from the backyard. Nothing was stolen from the house. In fact, cash and a debit card were still sitting untouched on the nightstand next to Denise. That meant the motive wasn't robbery. Whoever did this had a personal reason, and it looked like Denise had been deliberately targeted. Authorities canvassed the neighborhood along Lake Cedro, hoping for leads, but most neighbors had little to offer. No one could say anything negative about the Hollowell family. In fact, people described Denise as calm, well-spoken, and thoughtful. While she and the boys hadn't lived there long, her late parents had been familiar faces in the community. But then, some residents began to recall strange and troubling events that started shortly after Denise and her sons moved into the lake house. Local pets had begun disappearing, first a few cats, then dogs. Some of these animals were later found in remote corners of the area, badly mutilated. At first, folks chalked it up to wild animal attacks, but the condition of the remains suggested otherwise. It was too intentional, too gruesome. People began to fear that someone, possibly a disturbed individual, was behind it, and whoever it was, they seemed to be operating frighteningly close to home. Soon after the initial wave of missing pets, things in the area escalated. Residents began reporting the disappearance of young livestock, baby goats, foals, and other small animals. When these animals were found, the scene was deeply disturbing. Many had suffered what appeared to be intentional harm, deep slashes, torn wounds, and in some cases, severe disfigurement. Their eyes had been damaged, and the injuries suggested deliberate cruelty. Several locals reported these incidents to law enforcement, but it seemed like the cases weren't prioritized. Officers appeared to have more pressing matters than investigating harm to animals and missing pets. Interestingly, no one ever connected these gruesome acts with the Hollowell family. In fact, Denise and her sons had even helped search for some of the missing pets. She spoke with neighbors regularly, though she wasn't particularly close with anyone, and rarely had visitors at her home. Most people didn't know much about what was going on behind closed doors. Many weren't even aware that Angel had been placed with a different adoptive family. They assumed he had gone to live with relatives in town, just like Carlos had during a previous stretch. The detail about Carlos having lived elsewhere for a time caught the attention of investigators. They decided to dig deeper and reached out to the relatives who had taken him in, hoping to understand what led to that arrangement. As it turned out, Carlos had also experienced serious behavioral challenges, though most people around him had no idea. At 14, he started drinking alcohol and experimenting with various banned substances. His behavior became erratic and volatile. He would lash out, even toward his mother and younger brother. Denise eventually sought professional help. That's when Carlos was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and signs of obsessive-compulsive tendencies. These symptoms were reportedly made worse by his use of alcohol and psychoactive substances. He spent a short time in a treatment facility, but was later discharged with a prescription for medication, which he refused to take and ended up throwing away. At 16, Carlos stopped attending school, but managed to keep that fact hidden from his mother for a while. He pretended to leave for class each morning, even though he wasn't enrolled anymore. When Denise finally found out, it led to a major confrontation. Not long after, Carlos consumed a dangerous mix of painkillers and alcohol, a combination that nearly cost him his life. Denise called emergency services just in time, and medical staff were able to stabilize him. After that terrifying episode, a relative named Stephanie offered to step in and help. Her own son had once struggled with similar issues, including bipolar disorder and behavioral instability, during his teen years. Stephanie had done extensive reading on the subject and tried various therapeutic methods at home. Over time, her son seemed to grow out of that difficult period. He matured, went on to get an education, and eventually moved to another city to live a stable life. Stephanie was completely convinced that it was her approach, her own version of therapy, that had helped her son recover. She believed herself to be a self-taught expert in mental health, even though she had no formal training and relied solely on online advice and various books. Confident in her methods, she decided to try the same approach with her relative's son. and suggested that Carlos move into her home temporarily for what she referred to as treatment. Carlos ended up living at Stephanie's house for about 6 months. During that time, Denise would visit him regularly, and Stephanie conducted what she called therapy sessions. She suggested recording these sessions on tape, so they could later be reviewed and analyzed for progress. All the recordings were stored in her home, and after the tragedy involving Denise, those tapes became critical evidence. What the tapes revealed painted a deeply troubling picture of the relationship between Denise and Carlos. Their interactions were far from nurturing. Denise frequently blamed him for everything that had gone wrong in her life. She openly expressed regret over adopting him, calling him names, saying he was unwanted and that no one would ever love him. During this same period, Denise was also facing serious financial hardship. She had lost her teaching job and was scraping by with occasional, unstable side gigs. She began pressuring Carlos to find work and help cover household expenses. At one point, she stopped buying him clothes, claiming she couldn't afford it. Eventually, she even refused to feed him, telling him that if he wanted to eat, he'd have to buy his own food. Things deteriorated further. Denise resorted to verbal abuse, referencing the circumstances of his adoption in cruel terms. She would say things like she and her husband picked him up off the streets, and that without her, he would have already wasted away from hunger or illness in some rundown neighborhood. She made offensive, racially charged comments, reminded him of much the adoption process had cost her, and even demanded that he repay those expenses. Yet, despite all of this, about a month before the tragedy, Carlos expressed a desire to move back in with his adoptive mother. At Stephanie's suggestion, he even made a list of reasons why he wanted to return. One of the top reasons was his hope to repair the relationship. Denise, for her part, supported his goal of going to college. She believed that education was a crucial part of his future, and had promised to help with tuition costs if she could. Stephanie encouraged Denise to install surveillance cameras in several rooms of the house, specifically the areas where she and Carlos interacted most, so that Stephanie could continue monitoring the teen's behavior remotely. The idea sounded strange, but Denise agreed, partly as a precaution. It was clear she didn't fully trust Carlos, and feared that in a moment of anger, he might lose control. Interestingly, those same cameras, along with Denise's phone, mysteriously disappeared from the house. The surveillance system had been deactivated the day before the incident. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with it. According to him, Denise handled all of that herself. As for the phone, he said he hadn't seen it, and had no idea where it might be. A week before the tragedy, another intense argument broke out between Denise and Carlos, one that escalated into a physical altercation. A neighbor happened to witness the incident and intervened. He warned them that if something like that happened again, he wouldn't hesitate to call the police. After Denise's death, Carlos was immediately considered a person of interest. However, there wasn't enough concrete evidence to formally charge him at that point. Authorities interviewed him, but ultimately released him. At that time, the primary suspect remained his missing brother, Angel. The day after the incident, a local teen, a neighbor and friend of Carlos, stopped by to offer his condolences. They were around the same age and had a casual friendship, but Carlos didn't appear visibly upset. Instead, he told the boy that all he needed to do was make it through the next 3 weeks until his 18th birthday. After that, he said, he'd sell this cursed house of horrors and leave the area for good. His friend was taken aback by both the words and the unnerving calmness with which they were delivered. He shared the exchange with his parents, who in turn contacted the police. This prompted authorities to bring Carlos in for another round of questioning, but he didn't offer any new information. Investigators decided to bring in a dive team to search the lake behind the Hollowell property, suspecting that the missing cameras and Denise's phone may have been dumped there. The lake wasn't especially large, and it didn't take long for them to locate the items. Unfortunately, the cameras were useless. They had been turned off before the incident and contained no recorded footage. However, the phone told a different story. Data revealed it had been powered down, likely after hitting the water, just 10 minutes before Carlos made the call to emergency services. Even more telling, Denise had been actively messaging a friend on social media only 15 minutes prior to that. This allowed investigators to pinpoint the approximate time of the attack with a high level of accuracy. Carlos had insisted he'd been asleep during that time, and had only woken up when he heard the dogs barking outside, but analysis of his own phone usage painted a different picture. His device had been active shortly before Denise was attacked. Additionally, a nearby neighbor told police he had seen Carlos outside around 5:30 p.m., walking toward the backyard shed. When confronted with this evidence, including the neighbor's statement, Carlos started to backtrack and became inconsistent in his responses. Eventually, he admitted that he had, in fact, gone outside around that time. He claimed he was splitting firewood behind the house to blow off steam after an argument with his mom. At one point, Carlos said he went back inside the house to get a glass of water. He sat in the kitchen for about 5 minutes, and that's when he heard the dogs barking. He stepped outside, but didn't see anyone who might have let them out. Thinking it might have been his mother, he headed to her bedroom, and that's when he discovered her lying on the bed with an axe embedded in the back of her head. Carlos continued to insist he was innocent, maintaining that his runaway younger brother, Angel, was the real culprit. His attorney built a defense strategy around this version of events. Since there was no physical evidence directly linking Carlos to the crime, and because Angel was still missing, investigators had no choice but to keep him listed as a possible suspect. A major turning point in the case came in early 2020 when authorities finally tracked down Angel. He had been living in another state, held in a juvenile detention facility after being arrested for a break-in. Because he had used a false identity, it had taken time to confirm who he really was. Records showed that at the time of the crime, Angel was already in custody, meaning he couldn't have been involved in what happened to Denise. He was brought back to California to testify in court. On the stand, Angel described his brother as someone deeply troubled, someone who had tormented both him and their adoptive mother. He also claimed Carlos was responsible for the disturbing cases of animal cruelty that had plagued the neighborhood. Faced with mounting evidence and no way to redirect blame, Carlos eventually agreed to a plea deal and admitted responsibility for the crime. However, when pressed on his motive, he struggled to give a clear answer. He simply said he hated his mother, dreamed of selling the house, and wanted to leave everything behind. He said the idea just came to him while chopping firewood. This explanation was used in an attempt to frame the act as unplanned, a spontaneous outburst, rather than premeditated violence. Carlos even claimed he had experienced a temporary mental breakdown, but the fact that the surveillance cameras had been turned off in advance and later removed from the house painted a different picture, one that suggested careful preparation. In March 2021, Carlos was found guilty of the deliberate and intentional killing of his adoptive mother. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, because he was a minor at the time of the crime, the court granted him the right to a sentence review in the year 2041. Case 6. Derek Campos Lates was born on November 13, 1991. At the time of the events, he was a 20-year-old young man living with his mother in Wisconsin, United States. When Derek was born, his mother, Shelley, was only 19 years old and still in college. Shelley had no plans to have a child at that moment, and she knew life wouldn't be easy from then on, especially since the man who got her pregnant wanted nothing to do with the baby, leaving her to be a single mother. The following months were filled with anxiety and nervousness for Shelley, as she had no idea how she would support the child she was expecting. However, when Derek was born, she held him in her arms, looked at him, and felt a sense of peace. She said that from that moment on, she would do everything to ensure her son had a good life. Shelley faced many challenges as a mother, but she always tried to do her best. When Derek was just 7 weeks old, he became ill and started crying nonstop. After taking him to the hospital, doctors found that he had respiratory issues caused by severe pneumonia. His condition was critical, and because of that, he had to be urgently airlifted to a specialized hospital in Duluth, Minnesota. The flight took over 2 hours, which left Shelley extremely anxious. Upon arriving at the hospital, Derek was immediately admitted, and the doctor in charge told Shelley that he couldn't guarantee her son would survive because his condition was extremely serious. At that moment, Shelley began to pray and told herself that if her son survived, she would make him the happiest boy in the world. As you may already know, Derek survived, and after this great scare, Shelley became an extremely protective and affectionate mother. According to people close to her, Shelley gave Derek almost everything he asked for and indulged all of his wishes. This obviously spoiled him, and as we know, this usually doesn't end well. Derek's childhood was described as normal, but as he grew, he began to show abnormal behavior. He became an aggressive child who wouldn't accept no as an answer. On one occasion, Shelley was with Derek in a supermarket, and as they passed the toy section, the boy asked her for a toy he liked. However, That day Shelley was counting her money and told her son that she couldn't buy the toy, but promised they would come back another day to get it. Upon hearing this, Derek became furious. He then grabbed the toy he wanted and broke it. Next, he picked up another toy identical to the one he had broken and told his mother that if she didn't buy it, he would break that one too. Shelley ended up giving in to her son's demand and later said she had never seen Derek like that, with eyes full of hatred. As the years went by, Derek continued to display abnormal behavior. Unlike other children, when he ate, he didn't like to touch his food, not even when it was pizza fries or a sandwich. He would only eat with a fork and knife. He also didn't like to play with other children, and on some occasions, he even assaulted kids who tried to approach him to play. Even the way he played with his toys was unusual. Derek would line up all his toys in front of him in a very organized manner. Then he would step back a few meters and observe them for a while. He would only touch them again to put them away. Derek also didn't interact much with other adults besides his mother. On one occasion, a friend of Shelley's visited her at home, and she tried to talk to Derek, but the boy just ignored her with an annoyed look on his face. This same friend had brought her son, a boy almost the same age as Derek. The boy tried to play with Derek, but Derek didn't want to play with him. When the boy grabbed one of the toys that were lined up, Derek pushed him and then started hitting him. Shelley and her friend saw the scene and quickly restrained Derek, who even tried to bite his own mother. A few years later, when Derek was around 7 or 8 years old, Shelley met a man named Robert with whom she started a relationship. One day, Robert went to Shelley's house to meet Derek, and the meeting between the two was described as very strange. Robert was known for being a playful man, and he tried to play with Derek, but the boy completely ignored him. Although at that moment, Robert realized that Derek wasn't a normal child, he still kept trying to interact with him. At one point, Robert started playing with the boy's hair, looking at his scalp as if he were searching for something. When Shelley saw this, she questioned Robert about what he was doing, and Robert replied with a smile that he was just looking for the number 666. Shelley didn't fully understand and was a bit confused, so Robert told her to relax because he was just joking. Later on, Shelley understood what Robert was referring to. The relationship between Robert and Shelley developed, and eventually they decided to get married. After they married, they moved in together, and Robert started taking care of Derek as if he were his own son. Before that, Shelley had not set any limits for her son, and Derek basically did whatever he wanted. Robert knew that this was extremely harmful for a child, and since he had become part of the family, he thought it would be better to intervene. Robert began setting limits and establishing rules for Derek, something the boy was not at all accustomed to. On the first Christmas they spent together, Robert woke up early, arranged the presents under the tree, made a big breakfast, and waited for Shelley and Derek to wake up so they could enjoy everything he had prepared. However, as soon as Shelley and Derek woke up, Derek ran straight to the tree to open his Christmas presents. Shelley had promised her son that she would give him a video game, so Derek could hardly wait to enjoy this gift. But now the house had rules, and Robert told Derek that he could only open the presents if he had breakfast. Robert wanted that Christmas to be special, as it was the first Christmas he, Shelley, and Derek spent together. He wanted everyone to sit at the table and enjoy the big breakfast he had prepared, talking, as families usually do. Obviously, Derek didn't accept this and told Robert that he wasn't hungry and wanted to open the presents first. Robert stood firm and said that wouldn't be possible, and if Derek didn't eat breakfast, he wouldn't be allowed to open any presents that day. This was the kind of behavior Shelley had never shown. She didn't intervene, just watched. She knew that what Robert was doing was the best for Derek's upbringing. Derek sat at the table, but just stared at the food and didn't eat anything. Robert continued to tell the boy that he could only open the presents if he ate. A few minutes later, Robert and Shelley finished eating, but Derek didn't touch his plate. The two got up from the table and started cleaning up, leaving only Derek's plate. Hours went by, and night came, with Derek still sitting there, not eating and not opening the presents. Seeing that her son wasn't going to eat anything, Shelley told him to go to bed. The next day, when Robert left early for work, Shelley, taking advantage of the fact that her husband wasn't home, decided to give in to her son's tantrum and gave him the present she had bought for him. As soon as Derek opened the gift, he saw it was a video game, but he didn't thank her, not even showing any reaction. Instead of playing and enjoying his gift, he simply picked it up, climbed onto the couch, and threw it with all his strength, breaking the device. After that, Derek slowly walked back to his room, as if he wasn't at all concerned about any possible consequences. Shelley was very shaken and began to cry. When she calmed down, she took the device, put it back in the box, and went back to the store where she had bought it. She told one of the employees that there had been a problem during the transport, and the device wasn't working. That way, Shelley got a new video game, and when she returned home, she gave it to Derek, who didn't break it this time. Robert never knew about this. Some people who followed the case said that Shelley did this because she loved her son, but also because she was very afraid of him. When Derek became a teenager, his behavior worsened, and things at the family home became increasingly unbearable. Derek only wanted to stay locked in his room, and every time Robert tried to reach out to him, Derek would argue, shout, and curse. The two never physically fought, but the arguments were so intense that it seemed like things could get out of control at any moment. Shelley was completely lost in all of this. She watched each argument and felt powerless. Shelley was very sad about everything. She loved both her son and her husband, and she felt that at any moment this would lead to the end of the family. At first, Shelley didn't intervene, but later she started trying to calm things down, though most of the time she sided with Derek, even when he was completely wrong. This caused her marriage with Robert to deteriorate, until it reached a point where Robert couldn't take it anymore. He asked for a divorce and left the house. As time went by, Derek's behavior didn't change. He didn't make friends, didn't like interacting with anyone, and just wanted to stay home in his room. Shelley then decided to take her son to a psychologist to see if the professional could help in any way. The psychologist who evaluated Derek concluded that he was suffering from depression and prescribed a treatment that Derek followed for a short period of time. In 2009, just before Derek turned 18, he met a girl named Macy, who was 16 at the time. Macy was very different from Derek. She was extroverted, lively, had many friends, loved going out. She was the complete opposite of him. Still, the two got along well and began dating. Derek even changed his behavior after he started dating Macy. He began to smile, was affectionate with his girlfriend, became more communicative, and even started following some rules at home. He even told Macy that he loved her, something he had never said to his mother. Every time Shelley told her son that she loved him, he would just remain silent and not respond. Shelley was very happy about her son's relationship to her. Macy completed Derek, filling what was missing in him. Shelley believed that her son would finally act like a normal person and live a normal life, but she was completely mistaken. In the first year of their relationship, Derek told his mother that Macy was pregnant. Shelley was very happy with the news, even though the couple was very young and had no structure to raise a child. She even suggested to her son that Macy move in with them. At that time, neither Derek nor Macy had finished high school yet. They also didn't have jobs. As a result, Macy accepted her mother-in-law's invitation and moved in with Derek. At first, everything went well. The family seemed very united, and they even adopted a Labrador dog named Lucy. The following year, in 2010, Derek graduated from high school and his son with Macy was born. They named the boy Gabriel, who was born healthy and was warmly welcomed by the family. Macy still had to complete her last year of high school, and when she returned to school after having the baby, Derek took care of their son most of the time. Derek was considered a great father. He was attentive, affectionate, and very loving with Gabriel. Derek cooked, played with the baby, changed diapers, and did everything without complaining, which was hard to believe given his behavior and personality throughout his life. However, shortly before the child turned 1, Derek began slowly reverting to his old self. He started imposing rules in the house for almost everything, and everyone had to obey. This included cleanliness, organization, mealtimes, TV time, and many other things. Everything had to be done as Derek ordered. The house curtains always had to be closed. When Shelley woke up earlier than him, she would go to the living room, open the curtains to let light in, but as soon as Derek woke up, he would go and close them again. In addition, Derek started to become frustrated with everything and would argue about anything. He no longer allowed his son to play in the backyard, so the child could only play inside the house. Derek also made a sort of menu with all the types of meals he liked the most, and his mother had to prepare them whenever he chose, regardless of the day or time. He was the one who controlled the grocery shopping, even though he didn't work to help. After graduating high school, Macy got a job, and the only time Derek allowed her to leave the house was to go to work. She had a set time to leave and a set time to return. Derek timed her schedule based on the route she had to take from home to work and from work to home. He He knew exactly what time she left work and when she should arrive home. If Macy was even a minute late, Derek would argue with her when she got home. Shelley tried to calm things down when this happened, but Derek told her not to interfere. Due to all of this, Shelley, who had been happy about her son's improved behavior, started to feel depressed when she realized he was getting worse. Shelley turned to alcohol for solace, something she had struggled with in the past. She gave into the addiction again in an attempt to feel better and escape her reality. At that time, Derek was 19, and he was no longer satisfied with just imposing his will. He started saying disturbing things that left everyone uneasy. One night, Shelley went to the kitchen to get some water from the fridge and found Derek sitting at the table cleaning an AK-47 rifle. Shelley had no idea how Derek had gotten the gun, and she was so scared that she froze and didn't know how to react. When Shelley turned her back and started walking toward another room in the house, Derek pointed the gun at her and asked if she was afraid of him. Shelley stood still, unable to answer. She then went to her room, and after that incident, Shelley spent most of her time locked in her room drinking. Out of fear of her own son, she began avoiding him, and her room became her refuge. She only left for work, and whenever she encountered Derek, she spoke just enough to avoid upsetting him. Derek noticed that his mother started spending more time in her room and avoiding him. From time to time, he would go to her room and knock on the it was just a way to show that he was there, that he was around, almost as if he was asserting some dominance. One time, Shelley got sick and needed to be hospitalized for surgery to remove her gallbladder. When she returned home, she noticed that Lucy, the family dog, was missing. She asked Derek where Lucy was, and Derek said she had run into the street and was hit by a car. Shelley, terrified, asked where the dog was now, and Derek replied that she had died and that he had gotten rid of her body. The problem was that Lucy didn't have a habit of running into the street, as Derek claimed. Shelley knew her son was lying and probably had something to do with the dog's disappearance, but she was too scared to confront him and pretended to believe his story. Around this time, Derek began to abuse Macy, his girlfriend. This was the last straw for Macy, who had already had enough of the life she was living with Derek. The young woman decided it was time to leave. On her 18th birthday, Macy took advantage of the fact that Derek wasn't home, packed all of her belongings, and left. She decided to leave Gabriel, their son, behind because she believed that if she took the boy, Derek would go to great lengths to find him and would likely do something harmful to her out of revenge. Macy had already talked to Shelley, who supported her decision. When Derek came home and Shelley told him that Macy had left, he simply sat down and remained silent, showing no emotion. Shelley expected a completely different reaction, but Derek just stayed still, staring at her. Then he stood up, lowered his head, and went to his room. On September 7, 2012, Shelley was leaving for work when she found Derek in the living room with all the curtains closed, pacing back and forth. Derek was talking to himself and kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Gabriel will never call another man dad. Shelley asked her son what was going on, but Derek ignored her and kept repeating the phrase. Noticing she was going to be late for work, Shelley decided to leave Derek as he was and went to work. At that time, Shelley had stopped drinking and was attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. She was experiencing positive changes in her life and had improved significantly. The next day, September 8th, Shelley woke up early as usual and went to work. After work, she went to another meeting she attended at Alcoholics Anonymous. When the meeting ended, Shelley said goodbye to the people at the meeting and headed back home. As Shelley approached her house, she saw Macy's car in the driveway and the front door of the house was open. At first, Shelley thought Macy had come by to visit her son, but when she entered the house, she was struck by the eerie silence that filled the place. Inside the house, specifically in the living room, Shelley found what appeared to be blood stains. She followed these stains, which led her to the bathroom. The bathroom door was locked, but Shelley could see blood seeping under the door. At that moment, she feared that Derek had taken his own life or done something to his own son. But when she opened the bathroom door, she found Macy in the bathtub with a deep wound in her neck. Desperate, Shelley began searching the house for her grandson while calling the police, but there was no sign of the child, nor of Derek. The police arrived quickly at the house, and when they entered the bathroom, they saw that there was nothing more they could do. Macy was already dead. All Shelley could do in that moment was cry in despair, for if Derek was capable of doing that to Macy, he could just as easily do the same to his own son. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Shelley was taken to the police station, where the officers tried to calm her down and asked if she knew where Derek might be. Shelley said she had no idea, as Derek wasn't one to go out much, so he didn't have any special place he would go to in a situation like this. Since Derek was the prime suspect in the crime and the disappearance of his son, the detectives issued an Amber Alert. The following morning around 5 a.m., Derek checked into a hotel a few miles from his home. He was with Gabriel, his son, and appeared completely unconcerned. Due to the Amber Alert, the hotel clerk recognized Derek, but the clerk was smart and pretended to be unaware of anything, serving Derek as usual. When Derek went to his room with his son, the clerk called the police and made the report. The police arrived a few minutes later, arrested Derek, who did not resist, and managed to rescue Gabriel. The child was fine and had no injuries. Derek was still wearing the same clothes he had on when the crime was committed. There was even blood from Macy on his shoes, and the bloodstains found in the house were consistent with the prints from those same shoes. This was a major piece of evidence against him. In the car, Derek used to flee, which belonged to his mother. The police found the weapon used in the crime, a kitchen knife. Later, he was taken in for questioning and given the right to make a call to his mother. On the call, Derek apologizes, saying he never wanted things to end this way. Shelley then tells him she loves him, and Derek replies that he loves her too. It was the first time in his life that Derek told his mother he loved her. "Hey mother, it's me. I'm sorry about this whole thing. I didn't mean for anything to happen like this. I'm really sorry. All I can say is I'm still just really sorry about the whole situation. There's nothing I can do about it now. I'd do anything to go back in time, but that's not how life works. I love you too. Please take good care of my baby." From the moment Derek was arrested, Shelley considered helping him. She didn't want her son to spend the rest of his life in prison, so she was willing to testify in his favor in court. However, Derek never went to trial as he accepted a plea deal from the prosecution in which he pleaded guilty to the crime against Macy. As a result, in 2012, Derek Lates was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 40 years of his sentence. Macy's funeral took place a few days after her death in a ceremony full of sadness and anger. After everything that happened, Shelley no longer wanted to live in her house due to the terrible memories, so she decided to move. According to sources, she was granted custody of her grandson and now lives in a secluded, isolated place where people don't know her story. In a statement, Shelley said that she raises her grandson in a completely different way from how she raised Derek, as she doesn't want her grandson to be like his father. She also said that she feels guilty for what happened to Macy, and that she will do everything in her power to ensure that Gabriel's story is completely different. I couldn't find information on whether Shelley takes her grandson to visit his father in prison, but what is known is that Derek is in a maximum security prison in the state of Wisconsin, and will likely only leave there when he is elderly. Case 7. On June 24, 2007, the wrestling world woke up to a tragedy that would forever change its history. Chris Benoit, the former WWE World Heavyweight Champion, was now a part of one of the most horrifying events in wrestling history. In a shocking turn of events, Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were found dead in their Fayetteville, Georgia home. What seemed like an ordinary tragedy quickly turned into something much darker, a triple homicide followed by Benoit's own suicide. This wasn't the man fans knew and loved, this was something else. But why? What would drive a hero to commit such a horrific act? Today we're taking a look into the details of that weekend, and what caused a WWE hero to commit a murder-suicide. Benoit was known as a devoted family man, especially by those closest to him. To the wrestling world, though, he was a powerhouse, one of the biggest names in the sport. At 40 years old, he was on the rise, taking on fight after fight. The rabid Wolverine was especially beloved in his home country of Canada, where it seemed he could balance his brutal in-ring persona with being the perfect father at home. Wrestling icon Chris Jericho once said, "Chris was always very much a great father, very much about his family." But Benoit had a demanding life. In wrestling, careers are often shorter than in other fields, a reality driven by the dangerous nature of the sport. Even though the matches are scripted, the physical toll is real. Wrestlers get banged up, often enduring injuries that would sideline anyone else. Still, they push themselves to perform as many matches as possible during their limited window of opportunity. Benoit was no exception. He was always on the road, jumping from one ring to the next, no matter how far he traveled. If there was a show, he was there. That's what made what happened on June 23rd, 2007, all the more shocking. Leading up to the tragedy, Chris Benoit's behavior began to raise serious concerns among those closest to him. As a seasoned wrestler, Benoit was no stranger to the demands of the WWE schedule, but in the days before his family's death, something changed. On June 22, 2007, Benoit was scheduled to travel to a WWE event in Houston, Texas, but he missed his flight, which was highly unusual for him. Chavo Guerrero, a close friend and fellow wrestler, was the first to notice that something was off. When Benoit finally reached out to him, his voice sounded strange, almost disconnected. During the phone call, Benoit showed his love for Chavo in a way that wasn't normal, and that got him really concerned. Benoit then explained that his wife, Nancy, had been vomiting blood, and that their son, Daniel, was also seriously ill. This was more than enough to worry anyone, and it seemed like a reasonable explanation for his absence. Chavo thought that it was likely a temporary situation, and hoped to catch up with Benoit when they eventually met in Houston. But the next day, Benoit's behavior became even more bizarre. He left a series of odd voicemails for Chavo, apologizing for missing the show, but assuring him that he would catch the next flight to Houston. The voicemail didn't sound like Benoit, though. His tone was off, and his words seemed somewhat erratic. He also mentioned that he would be in Houston by 8 a.m., which was inconsistent with the time he would have needed to make the flight. What seemed like a simple family emergency had quickly turned into something alarming, and Chavo wasn't the only one who noticed. Others in the WWE community were beginning to worry that something bad was about to happen. Benoit mentioned that he had missed his flight and would be late to the WWE event in Beaumont, Texas, which was unusual since he was a professional who was always on time. He sounded groggy and exhausted, and ended the message with an, "It wasn't something Benoit typically said to a colleague," and it raised red flags. At first, Chavo tried to brush it off, thinking, maybe Benoit is just overwhelmed with his sick family and all the care he's been providing. But something still felt off. So just 12 minutes after receiving the voicemail, Chavo called him back, only to get no answer. He left a message, asking Benoit to call him back ASAP. At 3:44 p.m., Benoit returned the call and explained he missed the first call because he was changing his flight to a later time. Chavo was still uneasy and asked if something else was going on. Benoit brushed it off, claiming it had been an extremely stressful day, and that his family's suddenly falling ill had worn him out. But Chavo didn't buy it because he had known Benoit long enough to know there was more to the story. But he decided not to push. They'd talk later, after the fight. Chavo ended the call with, at 3:51 a.m. on Sunday, June 24th, Chavo and Scott Armstrong, both close friends of Benoit, received more odd texts from him. One of the messages contained the address of Benoit's family home, while the other mentioned that his dogs were safely locked in their enclosure near the pool, and that the garage door was still open. The texts were strange, but it was 3:51 a.m., so no one thought much of it. They figured it was just an accident, and went back to sleep. Chavo assumed Benoit had just made a mistake. A few hours later, Chavo was standing outside Houston Airport, waiting for Benoit to arrive. But hours passed, and he never showed. WWE officials took the next step, and called the Fayetteville police to perform a welfare check on Benoit and his family. On Monday, June 25, 2007, the WWE was getting ready for Raw in Corpus Christi. Johnny Ace was shown texts sent from Benoit and Nancy's phones early Sunday morning. These were texts that didn't exactly sound like they were coming from someone in the right frame of mind. With no word from Benoit, WWE called in the Fayetteville police for a welfare check. By 4:15 p.m., they got the call. 3 bodies were found in the Benoit house, and the scene was officially labeled a major crime scene. The bodies of Chris, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were found in different parts of the house. The murders of Nancy and Daniel were a nightmare. On Friday, June 22, 2007, Benoit murdered his wife in the bonus room of their Fayetteville home. Police later revealed that Nancy's limbs were bound before her death, with her arms tied with coaxial cables and her feet duct-taped together. In the kitchen trash, they found a balled-up tube sock and tape, soaked in dried blood. Authorities believed it was used as a makeshift gag before Nancy was killed. Her body was discovered wrapped in a blanket next to a Bible. The injuries showed that Benoit had pressed his knee into her back while pulling a cord around her neck, strangling her. But there were no signs of a struggle leading up to her death, and toxicology reports found alcohol in Nancy's system. But it was unclear whether it was consumed before her death or because of decomposition. The decomposition also made it hard to determine the levels of hydrocodone and alprazolam that were present in her body. But the medical examiner found no evidence that Nancy was as sedated as their son had been before he was killed. Daniel was Benoit's third child and second son, who was found dead in his bedroom the following day, June 23, 2007. Daniel had two older siblings from Benoit's first marriage and was Nancy's only child. He was suffocated and another Bible was found next to his body. But there were no bruises. The internal injuries to his throat confirmed the cause of death. Reports concluded that Daniel had been sedated with Xanax and was unconscious at the time of his death. His body had started decomposing, but it wasn't nearly as bad as his mother. Just hours before taking his own life on June 24, 2007, Benoit's internet searches raised serious questions about what he was planning. Among the final searches were how to tie a knot for hanging and how long it would take for a body to decompose. These types of searches are proof of a man who wasn't spiraling in confusion, but preparing for something diabolical. The last known photograph of Benoit, taken on June 22, 2000, captured him at Dr. Phil Aston's office, which would precede the nightmare about to unfold. Investigations later revealed Benoit had searched for ways to break a neck, a disturbing detail disclosed by his former fiancée, Nancy Toffolone, during a 2016 podcast. However, the Fayette County Sheriff's Office report didn't confirm these searches, and Benoit's autopsy didn't show neck injuries. Then there was the note, a final message found in a Bible next to the bodies of his wife and son. It simply read, "I'm preparing to leave this earth." No one knew exactly what it meant, but it felt like a final goodbye, maybe even a confession, as if Benoit was trying to make sense of what he had just done. The note was later sent to his first wife, Martina, and their two children in Canada. Benoit's father, Michael, confirmed it existed, suggesting the tragedy was planned rather than impulsive. The Bible, found beside Nancy and Daniel as well, only added to the dark nature of the scene. The note reflected guilt, while others saw it as Benoit finally coming to terms with his actions. In his final days, Benoit's life was overshadowed by darkness. Years of head injuries from wrestling had taken a severe toll on his brain, and the emotional weight of losing his close friend Eddie Guerrero seemed to push him further into despair. His mental state had gotten worse, and this combination of physical and emotional struggles ultimately led to one of the most tragic and disturbing events in wrestling history. He was found in his home gym, hanging from a pulley system with a towel around his neck. The weight of the gym equipment caused his neck to snap instantly. He removed the bar from a lat pull-down machine in his gym and fashioned a noose from the machine's cable. After releasing the weights, he strangled himself to death. It was a brutal, shocking way to end his life. No one could have expected it, especially after what he'd done to his own family. Toxicology reports on Benoit showed elevated testosterone levels, consistent with steroid use. They also found traces of Xanax and hydrocodone, which led to more questions. Was he under the influence when he murdered Nancy and Daniel? It's impossible to know for sure, but his mental state in those final days clearly wasn't stable. Looking at the crime scene, the autopsies, and the toxicology reports proved this was a methodical crime. Benoit took days to kill his wife, his son, and finally himself. Steroids were found in the Benoit house, which means roid rage might have been behind his actions. Some doctors have connected steroid use to uncontrollable anger and other psychological issues, including paranoia. Authorities also noticed a big gap between the deaths of Nancy and their son Daniel, which suggests that the murders were deliberate rather than out-of-control anger, and placing a Bible next to each body isn't consistent with a violent outburst. Prosecutors in New York began looking into Benoit's deliveries from Signature Pharmacy and MedXLife.com, companies that sold steroids and HGH online. Terrence Kindlon, the lawyer for MedXLife co-owner Gary Brandwine, denied the accusations that his client had sold steroids to Benoit. Sports Illustrated later reported that 3 packages from Signature Pharmacy were sent to Benoit, with the first arriving in December 2005 at a Texas address. A second was sent in February 2006 to Peachtree City, Georgia, and the third in July 2006 to Fort Walton Beach, Florida. This was part of a broader investigation into steroid use among wrestlers that named several other wrestlers, including Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Edge, and Gregory Helms. After the Benoit family tragedy, everyone wanted answers, but the more authorities looked into it, the more questions they found. By the time they discovered the bodies of Nancy and Daniel Benoit on June 25th, 2007, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, but the picture never really came together. The investigation was straightforward enough. Benoit murdered his wife and son before ending his own life. But something felt off. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. The scene was unsettlingly calm. Nancy's hands and feet were bound, and a Bible was found next to her and Daniel. Was this a sign of Benoit's breakdown? Or was he trying to make some twisted sense of what he'd done? Then there were the searches. Benoit's internet history was, well, disturbing. He'd Googled how to break a neck and how long it takes for a body to decompose. And the final search was on how to tie a knot for hanging. Benoit spent his last hours meticulously planning everything. Forensics didn't exactly clear things up. Benoit died from hanging with no broken neck, like some had speculated. Instead, he used a towel and pulley system in his home gym. Was this an attempt to control his death? Or just a sign of impaired judgment? We'll never know for sure. The toxicology report showed elevated testosterone levels that proved long-term steroid use. But it wasn't just the drugs. Benoit's autopsy revealed early signs of dementia and CTE. This was brain damage from years of hits to the head. CTE messes with your behavior, causes mood swings, and can lead to violence. Could that have been the tipping point? To top it all off, Eddie Guerrero, Benoit's best friend, died 2 years earlier, and many believe that loss pushed him over the edge. Eddie's passing hit him hard, and people close to Benoit have said it sent him into a downward spiral. He became more withdrawn, distant, and seemed to be struggling mentally. The combination of losing someone so close, along with the physical wear and tear from years of wrestling, put a lot of pressure on him. That pressure, along with everything else he was dealing with, probably started breaking him down mentally and emotionally. Neuroscientist and former wrestler Christopher Nowinski believes Benoit's had too many untreated concussions, which might have slowly eaten away at his mental health. Nowinski pointed out that Benoit was one of the few wrestlers who willingly took chair shots to the back of his head, which was downright reckless. After testing Benoit's brain, Dr. Julian Bales, head of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, found that Benoit's brain was in such bad shape that it looked like it belonged to an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Other tests revealed Benoit had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, with damage spreading across all 4 lobes of his brain and brainstem. Bales and his team concluded that this kind of brain trauma could lead to dementia, which might trigger extreme behavioral issues. Benoit's father later suggested that this brain damage was likely the root cause of the tragic murder-suicide, but the WWE dismissed this as speculative. Nancy had also filed for divorce in May 2003, claiming abuse from Benoit, but withdrew the filing 3 months later. In 2008, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Nancy may have suspected Benoit of having an affair with a female WWE wrestler, and the couple might have also fought over a life insurance policy. This information came from a report released by the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. There's no simple answer to what caused the Benoit family tragedy, but several theories have tried to make sense of how everything went so horribly wrong. WWE Chairman Vince McMahon weighed in on the tragedy, saying that it was a result of mental health issues combined with the brutal physical toll of Benoit's wrestling career. McMahon believes that Benoit's actions weren't just about steroids, but rather the damage done to his body and the emotional strain he was under. While McMahon's comments were controversial, it makes sense when you consider how wrestling affects people physically and mentally. Benoit was clearly struggling, and this was a tragic result of the years of stress, both physical and emotional, that he'd been under. A strange detail also surfaced when a statement about Nancy's death was added to the Chris Benoit Wikipedia page just 14 hours before police discovered the bodies of Benoit and his family. The update read, Chris Benoit was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW World Championship match at Vengeance, as Benoit was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife Nancy. It was spotted by Wyconos and later picked up by Fox News. The addition was made at 4 a.m. on June 25th, nearly 10.5 hours before the bodies were discovered at 2:30 p.m. the same day. What's more bizarre is that the IP address of the editor traced back to Stamford, Connecticut, the WWE headquarters at the time. When this early report made its way into the media, the anonymous editor claimed it was just a huge coincidence and nothing more.